I stood frozen in the dining room doorway holding the silver tray of appetizers I'd prepared for our family dinner as my stepsister Madison's cruel laughter filled the room. "She's basically our maid," she announced to her boyfriend, gesturing at me with her wine glass. My stepmother nodded approvingly while my father stared at his plate. The doorbell rang just then, and I set down the tray to answer it. The courier handed me a thick envelope. "Urgent delivery for the property owner," he said. 3 months earlier, I'd received a life-changing call that arrived while I was finishing my overnight shift at the hospital. The voice on the other end belonged to a lawyer named Bernard Hutchinson, whose formal tone immediately set my nerves on edge. "Miss Jamie Richardson," he'd asked, and when I confirmed, he delivered news that made me sink into the nearest chair. "I'm calling regarding the estate of Helen Margaret Whitfield. I understand she was your great-aunt." "Aunt Helen, my mother's aunt who had become my lifeline after Mom died when I was 12. She'd been the only family member who stayed in regular contact, sending birthday cards with handwritten notes and calling every Sunday evening without fail. She passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 weeks ago," Mr. Hutchinson continued. "You're named as the primary beneficiary in her will." The room spun slightly as he explained the details. Aunt Helen hadn't just left me some money or jewelry. She'd left me everything, her entire real estate portfolio, spanning 3 states. The crown jewel of this unexpected inheritance was a property management company called Phoenix Holdings, LLC, along with all its rental properties. "There's one property in particular you should know about," Mr. Hutchinson had said, shuffling papers audibly through the phone. 427 Magnolia Street. My heart stopped. That was my current address. The beautiful Victorian house where I'd lived for the past 7 years, paying rent for a converted attic room while my stepfamily occupied the rest of the sprawling home. "That can't be right," I'd whispered. "Oh, it's correct. Your aunt purchased the property 5 years ago through a blind trust. The family living there, your family, I presume, has been paying rent to Phoenix Holdings, which you now own entirely." I'd sat in stunned silence as he explained how Aunt Helen had structured everything. She'd bought the house secretly after learning about my living situation, setting up a property management company to handle the rental arrangement so my family would never know she owned it. Every month, my father had been writing rent checks to a company that would now be depositing them into my account. "Your aunt was quite specific in her instructions," Mr. Hutchinson had added. "She felt you deserved to decide how to handle this situation without interference. All the paperwork is in order, and the transfer will be complete within 30 days. That conversation had been 3 months ago. I'd spent weeks meeting with lawyers, signing documents, and trying to wrap my mind around the fact that I now owned the house where I'd been treated like an unpaid servant. The official transfer had been finalized last week, and I'd planned tonight's dinner as the moment to reveal everything. I'd imagined doing it gracefully, perhaps over dessert, finding the right words to explain how things would change. I'd even practiced in front of my bathroom mirror, trying different approaches that balanced honesty with kindness. But as I'd spent the entire afternoon in the kitchen, preparing an elaborate meal, while listening to Madison and her mother Patricia, lounging by the pool complaining about the neighbor's hedge being half an inch too high on their side, my resolve had begun to crack. They'd made 3 trips to the kitchen not to help, but to critique my menu choices and remind me to use the good china for Madison's boyfriend Trevor. "Make sure you don't burn the roast like last time," Patricia had said, despite the fact that I'd never burned anything in my life. "And remember, Trevor's from a good family. We want to make the right impression." Standing in that dining room doorway holding the tray of carefully crafted appetizers while Madison called me basically our maid, I realized my graceful announcement was never going to happen. They weren't capable of hearing it. In their minds, I would always be the help, regardless of what papers I held or what properties I owned. The envelope in my hand felt heavier than it should. I'd asked my lawyer to prepare eviction notices as a backup plan, hoping I'd never need them. Mr. Hutchinson had raised an eyebrow when I'd made the request. "Just in case things don't go as smoothly as I hope," I'd explained. Now, feeling the weight of their dismissal and disrespect, I understood why Aunt Helen had kept her ownership secret. She'd known what I was only now accepting. Sometimes the only way to change a dynamic is to flip the entire table. The morning after the dinner disaster, I woke at 5:30 as usual, my internal clock refusing to let me sleep past dawn, even though exhaustion weighed down every bone in my body. The attic room was cold. It always was in November, with its single ancient radiator that clanked and wheezed but barely produced heat. I wrapped myself in the thick robe I'd bought with my first paycheck as a pediatric nurse and made my way down 2 flights of stairs to the kitchen. The house was silent except for the familiar creaks and groans of old wood settling. This Victorian had been built in 1924, and every board seemed to have its own voice. I'd learned them all during my 7 years here, knowing which steps to avoid when trying not to wake anyone, and which floorboards announced arrivals better than any doorbell. As I started the coffee maker, a luxury I'd purchased for myself since Patricia insisted on buying cheap instant coffee, for the household memories of how this arrangement began flooded back. I'd been 21, fresh out of nursing school and starting my first real job at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. My father had called me one evening, his voice lighter than I'd heard it in years. "I've met someone," he'd said. "Her name's Patricia, and she makes me happy, Jamie, really happy." I'd been genuinely glad for him. The 9 years since my mother's death had been hard on both of us, though in different ways. While I'd thrown myself into school and caring for our home, he'd retreated into his work as an accountant, coming home later and later, until some nights he didn't come home at all. Patricia had seemed nice enough during our first meeting at a restaurant. She was attractive in a polished way, with perfectly styled blonde hair and manicured nails that clicked against her wine glass. Her daughter Madison, then 18 and headed to community college, had spent the entire dinner on her phone. "Your father tells me you're very responsible," Patricia had said, studying me with pale blue eyes. "He says you basically ran the household after your mother passed." I should have recognized the calculating look then, but I'd been too pleased to see my father smiling again. The wedding had been small and quick, a courthouse ceremony I'd attended in my scrubs, having come straight from a shift. Within a week, Patricia and Madison had moved into our family home, and the dynamic had been established immediately. Jamie's used to taking care of things. My father had explained to them as I'd cleared the dinner plates that first night. She's been doing it since she was 12. Patricia had smiled approvingly. "How wonderful. Madison and I aren't really domestic types, are we, sweetheart?" Madison had looked up from her phone just long enough to smirk. Definitely not. And so it began. What had started as me being helpful cooking dinner, because I got home first, tidying up because I liked things neat, had gradually morphed into an expectation, then an obligation, finally an unspoken requirement for my continued residence in my childhood home. The transformation had been gradual enough that I'd barely noticed it happening. First, Patricia had suggested I move to the attic room. "Madison needs a proper bedroom, and that attic space is so cozy," she'd said. "Plus, with your nursing hours, you'll have privacy up there." My father had agreed it made sense. My mother's craft room in the attic had been converted into a small bedroom with a slanted ceiling that meant I could only stand upright in the center. But I'd been working so many double shifts as a new nurse that I'd told myself it didn't matter. Then came the rent. "Everyone should contribute," Patricia had announced 6 months after moving in. "Madison's in school and I'm not working while I settle in, but you have a good job, Jamie. $400 a month seems fair for room and board." The board part had been a joke. I bought my own groceries after Patricia complained my soy milk took up too much refrigerator space. I cooked elaborate meals I barely had time to eat because my family dinners consisted of serving others while standing in the kitchen catching bites between bringing out courses. Over the years, the rent had increased first to $500, then $600, now $700 a month for my attic space. Meanwhile, I watched Patricia redecorate the entire house, removing traces of my mother piece by piece. The wallpaper Mom had chosen was replaced with Patricia's preferred beige paint. The garden my mother had lovingly tended was paved over for a larger patio. "Your mother had interesting taste," Patricia would say whenever she changed something else. But we need to modernize. My father said nothing. He'd mastered the art of strategic silence, burying himself in his newspaper or suddenly needing to make work calls whenever tension arose. On the rare occasions I'd tried to talk to him about how I was being treated, he'd pat my shoulder and mumble something about keeping the peace. Patricia's high-strung, he'd say, and Madison's still adjusting. Just give it time. 7 years, that's how much time I'd given it. In those 7 years, I'd advanced from junior nurse to charge nurse in the pediatric ICU. I'd saved lives, comforted grieving parents, and earned the respect of doctors twice my age. But in this house, I remained the girl who cooked and cleaned and stayed out of the way. My phone buzzed with my work alarm, 6:30, time to shower and leave for my 12-hour shift. As I headed back upstairs, I paused at the second-floor landing. Through Patricia and my father's bedroom door, I could hear Patricia's alarm going off. She'd hit snooze at least 3 times before getting up around 8, then spend 2 hours on her morning routine before heading to her part-time job at a boutique owned by her friend. Madison's door was covered in keep out signs and band stickers. She dropped out of community college after 1 semester and now worked sporadically as a social media consultant, which seemed to mean taking selfies and attending parties. At 25, she still lived at home rent-free, her mother quick to point out that creative types need support while they find their path. I climbed the narrow stairs to my attic room, ducking automatically at the low beam that had caught my head countless times in the early days. The space was cramped, but meticulously organized it had to be to fit everything I owned. My nursing textbooks lined a small shelf alongside the few photo albums I'd managed to save from Patricia's redecorating purges. My mother smiled out from a frame on my nightstand, frozen in time at 38, just 2 years older than I was now. "You wouldn't recognize the place, Mom," I whispered to her photo. "Or maybe you would. Maybe you'd see exactly what I've been too scared to see." The shower in my tiny bathroom ran lukewarm at best, another perk of attic living. As I dressed in fresh scrubs, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. 28 years old with tired eyes and shoulders that curved forward from years of making myself smaller in my own home. But there was something else in my reflection now, a straightening of my spine, a firming of my jaw. The knowledge that I owned the deed to this house had changed something fundamental in how I saw myself. I wasn't a guest here, tolerated in exchange for services rendered. I was the owner, and they were tenants who'd violated not just the terms of their lease, but basic human decency. My shift at the hospital passed in a blur of medications, monitoring, and the controlled chaos of pediatric intensive care. I held a premature baby whose parents were too scared to touch her, helped a 6-year-old boy recovering from heart surgery take his first steps, and stayed late to sit with a teenage girl who'd survived a car accident that killed her best friend. This was where I mattered, where my presence made a difference, where no one had ever once suggested I eat in the kitchen because the dining room was for family. By the time I returned home that evening, it was past 8 o'clock. The house blazed with lights. Patricia never turned them off, despite constantly complaining about the electric bill I paid half of. Through the dining room window, I could see them finishing dinner. They'd ordered pizza, the boxes scattered across the antique table that had belonged to my grandmother. I used my key quietly, hoping to slip up to my room unnoticed, but Patricia's voice caught me at the stairs. "Jamie, is that you? We left you some pizza in the kitchen, and the dishes need doing when you get a chance." I paused my hand on the banister. 7 years of automatic obedience warred with 3 months of knowing I owned every inch of this house. "Actually," I called back, "I'm tired, I'm going to bed." The silence that followed was deafening. I climbed the stairs to my attic room, each step feeling like a small revolution. Behind me, I heard Patricia's offended sputtering and Madison's dramatic gasp. Change was coming to 427 Magnolia Street. They just didn't know how much. Standing in the foyer with the courier's envelope weighing heavy in my hands, I could hear Madison's boyfriend, Trevor, laughing at something in the dining room. The sound grated against my nerves like sandpaper. I recognized the law firm's logo embossed in gold on the envelope, Hutchinson Marley and Associates, the same firm that had handled Aunt Helen's estate and prepared the documents I'd hoped never to use. Through the archway, I could see them all at the dinner table, my family, though that word felt increasingly hollow. Patricia sat at the head where my mother used to preside, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed as always. My father occupied his usual spot to her right, methodically cutting his food into precise squares. Madison lounged across from Trevor, her phone propped against the water pitcher as she recorded their dinner for her Instagram stories. "Babe, tell them about the promotion." Madison urged Trevor, who launched into a story about his job at his father's investment firm. Nobody noticed I hadn't returned with the dessert I'd gone to fetch when the doorbell rang. I ran my finger under the envelope's seal, the sound of tearing paper, masked by Trevor's booming voice. Inside were 3 copies of eviction notices, each meticulously prepared, with the legal language Mr. Hutchinson had assured me was ironclad. 21 days to vacate, the minimum required by Pennsylvania law. "What's taking so long with dessert?" Madison's voice cut through my thoughts. She appeared in the archway, wine glass in hand, her expression souring when she saw me. "God, Jamie, we have a guest. Can't you—" Her eyes landed on the papers in my hands. Something in my expression must have alarmed her because she stepped closer, reaching out with grabbing fingers. "What's this supposed to be?" She snatched the documents before I could stop her, her eyes scanning rapidly. The wine glass tilted dangerously in her other hand as her face shifted from annoyance to confusion to shock. "Eviction notice." Her voice climbed an octave. "This must be some mistake." The dining room conversation halted. Patricia's heels clicked against the hardwood as she appeared beside her daughter. "What are you shrieking about now, Madison?" "This—" Madison waved the papers dramatically. "Some eviction notice, it's completely insane. Tell her mom. Tell Jamie this is obviously fake or something. We've never missed a rent payment to the property management company." Patricia snatched the papers from Madison, her reading glasses materializing from somewhere as they always did, when she needed to scrutinize something. I watched her face cycle through the same emotions as Madison's, though she tried harder to maintain composure. This has to be an error," Patricia said, though her voice lacked conviction. "We pay Phoenix Holdings, LLC $7,000 on the 1st of every month. Direct deposit. Never late." "There's no error," I said quietly. My father appeared in the doorway, Trevor hovering behind him, with the confused expression of someone who'd stumbled into family drama on a first visit. "What's happening?" Dad asked, though his tone suggested he'd rather not know. "Your daughter seems to be involved in some kind of prank," Patricia said, thrusting the papers at him. "An eviction notice, as if anyone could evict us from our own home." "Technically," I said, finding my voice growing stronger, "it's not your home. You're renters, and I'm within my legal rights to issue this notice." The foyer fell silent except for the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, another piece that had belonged to my mother's family, somehow surviving Patricia's redecorating purges. Trevor cleared his throat awkwardly. "Maybe I should—" "Stay," Madison commanded, grabbing his arm. "I want a witness to whatever insanity is happening here." Patricia's eyes narrowed as she studied me with the calculating look I knew too well. "You're within your rights. What exactly do you think you know about our rental agreement, Jamie?" "I know everything about it," I replied, surprised by how calm I felt. "I know you pay $7,000 monthly for a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom Victorian in one of Philadelphia's most desirable neighborhoods. I know you signed a lease agreement that specifically limits occupancy to 4 people and 2 pets. I know you're currently in violation of multiple terms of that lease." "How could you possibly—" Patricia began, then stopped. The color drained from her carefully made-up face. "No. Phoenix Holdings, LLC, I said simply. I own it." The explosion was delayed by approximately 3 seconds of stunned silence, then erupted like a volcano. Madison actually threw her wine glass, though it hit the wall several feet from where I stood, shattering into pieces that scattered across the hardwood floor I'd polished that morning. "You lying little—" Madison's screech was cut off by her mother's hand on her arm. "Explain," Patricia commanded in the tone she used when demanding to speak to managers. "Now." "My great-aunt Helen passed away 3 months ago," I said, maintaining eye contact with Patricia, even as my peripheral vision tracked Madison's aggressive posturing. "She left me her entire estate, including a portfolio of rental properties. This house is one of them. She purchased it 5 years ago through a trust and set up Phoenix Holdings to manage it." "That's impossible," my father said, finally finding his voice. "We've lived here for 7 years. The Weatherbys sold it to a trust managed by Phoenix Holdings," I finished, "which has been depositing your rent checks into an account that now belongs to me." Trevor had backed himself against the wall, clearly reassessing his relationship with Madison as her face contorted with rage. Smart man. "You've known for 3 months." Patricia's voice could have frosted windows. "You've been collecting our rent for 3 months and said nothing. Technically, the estate was in probate for most of that time. The transfer only finalized last week, and I plan to tell you tonight over dinner. I thought we could discuss things civilly, maybe work out a new arrangement that—" "Arrangement?" Madison laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "You want to make an arrangement with us after this betrayal?" "Betrayal." The word sparked something hot in my chest. Let's talk about betrayal, Madison. Let's talk about 7 years of treating me like unpaid help in what I now know was my inherited house. Let's talk about charging me rent for an attic room while you lived rent-free in a master suite. Let's talk about calling me basically the maid to your boyfriend not 20 minutes ago. "You are the maid," Madison snapped. "You cook, you clean, you—" "I work 60 hours a week as a pediatric ICU nurse," I interrupted. "I save children's lives. What I do here, I've done out of some misguided sense of family obligation. That ends now." Patricia drew herself up to her full height, which in her 3-inch heels put her slightly above my 5'6" frame. "You can't evict us. We have rights as tenants." "You absolutely do," I agreed. "That's why you have 21 days' notice as required by law. Mr. Hutchinson, you remember him. The lawyer who sent these notices has assured me everything is completely legal." "On what grounds?" my father demanded, finally engaging with the situation instead of hoping it would resolve itself without his involvement. I pulled out my phone, opening the photos I'd taken over the past week in preparation. Let's see. Madison's 3 dogs when the lease clearly states a 2-pet maximum. The illegal cannabis growing operation in the basement. Yes, Madison, I know about your boyfriend's gardening project. The jewelry-making business Patricia runs from the garage, which violates the residential-only clause. The unauthorized renovations to said garage. Should I continue? Each violation landed like a physical blow. Madison's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, while Patricia's face cycled through various shades of red. "The dogs are emotional support animals," Madison protested weakly. "Only one has documentation, and it's from an online site that sells certificates for $50. I countered. Mr. Hutchinson already verified it wouldn't hold up legally. "The garage renovations were improvements," Patricia sputtered. "We increased the property value. Without permission, making them lease violations. You knocked out a weight-bearing wall without permits. The city could condemn the structure." Trevor had edged toward the front door. "Madison, babe, maybe we should—" "Don't you dare leave," Madison whirled on him. "Tell her she can't do this. Your dad's a lawyer." "Corporate tax law," Trevor mumbled. "This isn't really my—" "Get out!" Madison shrieked, and Trevor fled with the speed of someone who'd just avoided a bullet. The front door closed behind him with a definitive click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. My father sank onto the bottom stair, head in his hands. Patricia stood frozen, her mask of superiority cracking as the reality set in. Madison vibrated with rage, looking between her mother and me like a tennis spectator. 21 days, I repeated quietly. Use them wisely. I turned to go upstairs, needing space to process what had just happened, but Patricia's voice stopped me. "This is because of her, isn't it?" Her voice dripped venom. "Your precious Aunt Helen. She always hated that Richard remarried." I turned back slowly. Aunt Helen never hated anyone, but she saw how you treated me, how you all treated me, and she decided I deserved better than being a servant in my own family's home. Your family. Madison laughed bitterly. "We're not your family. We never wanted you here. Mom only put up with you because you came with Dad, and Dad only kept you around because you reminded him of your pathetic mother." The words hung in the air like poison gas. I waited for my father to deny it, to say something, anything. He remained silent, studying his hands. "Thank you for making this easier," I said finally. "Mr. Hutchinson will be in touch about the formal eviction proceedings. I'll be staying at a hotel tonight. When I return tomorrow, I expect this mess." I gestured at the shattered wine glass. "To be cleaned up." I climbed the stairs to my attic room with measured steps, not running despite the voices that erupted below. In 20 minutes, I had packed a bag with enough clothes and toiletries for a week. My important documents were already in a safety deposit box at the bank, moved there along with my mother's jewelry when I first learned about the inheritance. As I descended back through the house, the arguing in the dining room reached fever pitch. Patricia was demanding my father do something, anything. Madison was on her phone, probably blasting the situation on social media. My father remained characteristically silent. I paused at the front door, looking back at the foyer where I'd stood countless times, arms full of groceries no one helped carry, or returning from long shifts to cook dinner for people who couldn't be bothered to ask about my day. The Victorian house on Magnolia Street had been many things: my childhood home, my prison, my inheritance. Now it would become my liberation. The November air bit sharp and cold as I stepped onto the porch, but I'd never felt warmer. In my hand, my phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Hutchinson. "Documents delivered successfully. Let me know if you need anything else." I typed back, "They received them. I'll need your full services." His response was immediate. "Already preparing. You're doing the right thing." As I drove away, I didn't look back. But in my rearview mirror, I could see every window in the house blazing with light and shadows moving frantically behind the curtains. Let them panic. Let them rage. For the first time in 7 years, I was going home, even if home was currently room 217 at the Hampton Inn. The Hampton Inn's breakfast was a far cry from the elaborate spreads I usually prepared at home. But there was something liberating about choosing my own waffle toppings without Patricia critiquing the carbohydrate content or Madison stealing the strawberries I'd sliced. I'd barely finished my coffee when my phone exploded with notifications. 47 text messages, 12 missed calls, 3 voicemails, all from the house on Magnolia Street. I scrolled through the texts first. Madison had started around midnight with a barrage of expletives and threats that would have been more concerning if they weren't so poorly spelled. Patricia's messages, sent at 2 in the morning, alternated between legal threats and attempts at manipulation. My father had sent only one, "We need to talk." The voicemails were variations on the same theme, with Patricia's final one, informing me that they were calling a family meeting for 10 o'clock, and my presence was required. I checked the time. 9:45. Perfect. I took my time getting ready, choosing my most professional outfit, a charcoal blazer and slacks I usually reserved for meetings with hospital administration. If they wanted to treat this like a business negotiation, I'd dress the part. The eviction documents went into my leather portfolio along with copies of the lease, the deed, and photographs of every violation I'd documented. The drive back to Magnolia Street took 12 minutes. I'd made this journey thousands of times, but never as the acknowledged owner. The Victorian looked different somehow in the morning light, its pale yellow paint and white trim gleaming. Aunt Helen had maintained it beautifully through the property management company, I realized. All those repairs Patricia complained about, the prompt fixes whenever something broke, that had been Aunt Helen taking care of the house from afar. I parked on the street rather than in the driveway, a small assertion of change. Through the living room windows, I could see them already assembled. Patricia pacing Madison sprawled on the couch, my father in his usual chair. The front door was locked. I had a key, of course, but I rang the doorbell instead. Let them answer their own door for once. Madison yanked it open, her usually perfect makeup smudged and her hair in a messy bun. "Finally, do you have any idea what you've put us through?" "Good morning to you, too," I said, stepping past her into my house. The foyer still showed signs of last night's drama, a faint stain on the wall where the wine had splattered, though someone had cleaned up the glass. "Jamie." Patricia's shriek echoed through the house. She appeared in the living room doorway, perfectly put together despite the early hour. Of course she'd take time for full makeup and hair before a family crisis. "Get in here, now!" I followed at my own pace, taking in details I'd never noticed before. The crown molding Aunt Helen had paid to restore. The original hardwood floors I'd spent countless hours maintaining. The chandelier my mother had chosen, one of the few pieces that survived Patricia's purges, because it was too expensive to replace. They'd arranged themselves strategically. Patricia stood by the fireplace like a general preparing for battle. Madison had claimed the entire couch, her 3 dogs, Precious Princess and Duchess, sprawled around her in defiance of the 2-pet policy. My father sat in his leather recliner looking older than his 58 years. The only available seat was a wooden chair they'd clearly brought in from the dining room. Positioned in the center of the room, it looked suspiciously like an interrogation setup. I remained standing. "Sit," Patricia commanded. "I'm comfortable here." I replied, positioning myself by the archway where I could see all of them, and more importantly, where the exit remained clear. "This is exactly your problem." Patricia began launching into what was clearly a prepared speech. "This defiance, this ingratitude after everything we've done for you, everything you've done for me." I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "Please elaborate. I'd love to hear this list." Patricia's jaw tightened. "We gave you a home when you could have been out on the street after college. We included you in family activities. You charged me $700 a month for an attic room in a house I now own," I corrected. "You excluded me from family meals unless I was serving them. You treated me like unpaid domestic help while I worked 60-hour weeks saving children's lives." "Nobody forced you to cook and clean," Madison interjected from her throne of dogs. "You're just naturally servile. It's not our fault you never said no." Actually, I did say no, multiple times. Remember Christmas 2 years ago when I had to work a double shift and asked you to handle dinner? You ordered Chinese takeout and made me reimburse you for my portion when I got home at midnight. "That's different," Madison muttered. "How about last year when I had the flu and asked if someone else could cook for once? Patricia, you said I was being dramatic and left a can of soup outside my door." "You weren't that sick," Patricia protested. "You went to work the next day." "Because I'd used all my sick days caring for Dad when he had his appendectomy. The same surgery where you went to a spa weekend because hospitals depressed you." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair but said nothing. His silence had become such a constant that I barely expected more. "Did you have something to do with this?" Patricia whirled on me, brandishing her phone. "Did you somehow manipulate Helen into leaving you this house?" "Is that really what you think?" I asked. "That I somehow tricked a sharp 91-year-old woman into leaving me property? Aunt Helen had all her faculties until the end. She made her choices based on what she observed." "And what exactly did she observe?" Patricia's voice could have cut glass. I pulled out my phone, opening the email Mr. Hutchinson had sent with scanned copies of Aunt Helen's letter. "Would you like me to read her exact words?" Before they could respond, I began, "I've watched my grandniece, Jamie, endure treatment that would break most people's spirits. She pays rent for substandard accommodations in her family home while working tirelessly as a nurse. She cooks elaborate meals she's not invited to share. She cleans spaces she's not welcome to enjoy. She gives endless labor and receives endless criticism in return." Madison snorted. "Dramatic much?" I continued reading. "The family treats her not as a daughter and sister, but as convenient help. They take her money, her time, her efforts, and give back nothing but disdain. Richard has failed his daughter in every way that matters, choosing comfort over conscience. I cannot fix the emotional damage they've inflicted, but I can ensure Jamie has the security and dignity she deserves." Silence settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Patricia's face had gone pale beneath her foundation. Madison chewed her lip, a nervous habit she usually hid. My father stared at his hands folded in his lap. "She spied on us," Patricia said, finally grasping for outrage. "She invaded our privacy." "She visited twice a year and had eyes," I corrected. "Anyone could see how you treated me. The neighbors have seen it. My co-workers have seen it when I've had to explain why I can't join them for drinks because I need to get home to cook dinner. Everyone has seen it except the three of you." "This is illegal," Patricia announced, switching tactics. "You can't evict family." I opened my portfolio, pulling out the lease agreement. "Actually, you're not my family, you're my tenants. And according to this lease you signed with Phoenix Holdings, I can evict you for multiple violations." I spread the supporting documents on the coffee table Patricia had bought to replace my mother's antique. Unauthorized renovations to the garage without permits, running a business, your jewelry-making operation from a residential property, exceeding the pet limit, subletting space to Madison's boyfriend for his growing operation. "Ex-boyfriend," Madison muttered, "and I didn't know he was growing anything." "The plants in the basement with the grow lights suggest otherwise," I said. "Then there's the parties that violate noise ordinances, the damage to the hardwood floors from your dogs, and my personal favorite, the clause about maintaining the property in good condition which you violated by removing load-bearing walls in the garage." "We improved the property value," Patricia protested. "You created a potential structural hazard. The city inspector I consulted was quite concerned. In fact, he mentioned potential fines." That was a calculated bluff. I hadn't actually called an inspector yet, but Patricia's face suggested she believed it. "Daddy, do something," Madison commanded, reverting to the whine that usually got her what she wanted. My father finally looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time since I'd entered. "Jamie, you're upset. I understand that, but this is extreme. Surely we can work something out." "I'm not upset, Dad. I'm done. There's a difference." I kept my voice level, professional. "I tried to work things out for 7 years. I accepted every excuse, every promise that things would get better. They never did." "But eviction," he spread his hands. "Where will we go?" "That's not my problem to solve. You have 21 days to figure it out." 21 days, Madison screeched. "I'm having my birthday party here in 2 weeks. I've already sent invitations. Then you'll need to find a new venue." "You can't do this." Madison jumped up, scattering dogs. "This house has been our home for 7 years. And it's been mine for 28, I said quietly. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every important moment of my life until Mom died happened in this house. You've spent 7 years trying to erase her from it. The wallpaper, she chose the garden. She planted the furniture her family passed down. You've systematically removed it all." "Your mother's been dead for 16 years, Patricia said coldly. "It's morbid to keep shrines." Something inside me, some last thread of restraint, snapped. Morbid? You want to know what's morbid? It's a grown woman being jealous of a ghost. It's systematically erasing every trace of a child's dead mother while demanding that same child cook her recipes because Jamie makes it just like a real homemaker. It's charging that grieving child rent in her own inherited home while living off her father's income and contributing nothing but criticism and cruelty. "How dare you?" Patricia started. "I'm not finished." My voice rose for the first time. "What's morbid is a father who's so desperate to keep his new wife happy that he'll watch his daughter be turned into a servant. What's morbid is a 25-year-old woman who's never held a real job, never paid rent, never cooked a meal, but feels entitled to call the person supporting her lifestyle the help." "I have a job," Madison protested. "I'm a social media influencer. You have 3,000 followers, most of whom are bots. Your last sponsored post was for a teeth whitening kit that paid you in product. You've earned less this year than I spend on groceries for this household in a month." "Richard," Patricia commanded, "control your daughter." My father stood slowly, his accountant's posture straightening. For a moment, I thought he might actually defend me. "Jamie," he said, in his reasonable voice, the one he used for difficult clients, "let's discuss this calmly. There's no need for lawyers and evictions. We're family." "Are we?" I asked. "Because family doesn't charge family rent for an unheated attic room. Family doesn't make family eat alone in the kitchen. Family doesn't stand by while their daughter is called the maid and say nothing." "I didn't hear Madison say that," he protested weakly. "Because you never hear anything that might require you to take a stand. You've perfected the art of strategic deafness, Dad. Every cruel comment, every unfair demand, every moment where you could have said enough, you chose silence. Well, congratulations. Your silence bought you 21 days to find a new place to live." "You're being vindictive," he said, his voice hardening. "This isn't like you, Jamie. Your mother would be disappointed." The words hit exactly where he'd aimed them, but instead of crumbling, I felt a surge of clarity. "My mother," I said slowly, "would be disappointed that it took me 7 years to stand up for myself. She raised me to be strong, to know my worth, to fight for what's right. Somewhere along the way, I forgot those lessons. But Aunt Helen remembered, and she made sure I'd have the tools to remember too." I gathered my documents, sliding them back into the portfolio with steady hands. "The eviction notice is legal and enforceable. You have 21 days. I suggest you use them wisely." "Where are you going?" Patricia demanded as I headed for the archway. "To the hotel where I'm staying until you vacate my property. Don't try to change the locks. I have legal ownership and will return with law enforcement if necessary. Don't damage anything in retaliation. I've documented the current condition and will pursue charges for any vandalism. And don't think this is a negotiation. It's not." "Jamie, please," my father called after me. "Let's talk about this, just the two of us." I paused at the threshold, looking back at the man who'd raised me, loved me, and ultimately failed me. "We had 16 years to talk, Dad. You chose Patricia's comfort over those conversations every single time. I'm done talking." As I walked through my house to the front door, I heard the explosion of voices behind me. Patricia shrieking about lawyers and rights, Madison wailing about her party and her life being ruined, my father trying to calm them both with empty platitudes. The November air embraced me as I stepped onto the porch. Across the street, Mrs. Chen was pretending to water her already dormant garden while obviously watching the drama. She caught my eye and gave me a small nod of approval. I nodded back, then walked to my car with my head high. 21 days. That's all that stood between me and freedom in my own home. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with incoming calls and texts. I ignored them all. For the first time in 7 years, their crisis was not my problem to solve. The hotel room was quiet when I returned a blessed sanctuary from the chaos I'd left behind. I ordered room service, something I'd never done before, and ate lunch while watching the city's skyline instead of serving others and catching bites in the kitchen. My phone continued buzzing. Finally, I checked the messages. Most were variations of rage and disbelief from Madison and Patricia, but one stood out. From Dad, "Your Aunt Helen would be proud of you. I'm sorry it came to this. I'm sorry for everything." I stared at the text for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Sorry was just another word when it came without action or change. Aunt Helen had known that. She'd known that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to stop trying to save everyone else. The family meeting from hell was over, but my real life, my free life, was just beginning. The explosion was immediate. Madison threw her phone, screaming about her upcoming birthday party. The device sailed past my head, missing by inches, before clattering against the hardwood floor. The protective case bedazzled with fake diamonds spelling "Princess" scattered rhinestones across the Persian rug Patricia had bought to replace my grandmother's hand-woven carpet. My party is in 2 weeks. Madison's voice climbed to a pitch that made the dogs whimper. Everyone's already RSVP'd. The caterers are booked. This is social suicide. Patricia snatched the eviction papers, waving them like a battle flag. You manipulative little, this is entrapment. You've been planning this, haven't you? Pretending to be the dutiful daughter while plotting behind our backs? There's no entrapment, I said, maintaining the calm tone I used with agitated families at the hospital. You signed a lease with clear terms. You violated multiple clauses. The law is straightforward. My father finally spoke his voice, carrying the authority he usually reserved for correcting accounting errors. This is illegal. You can't evict family. I pulled out my phone, showing them the lease they'd signed with Phoenix Holdings. The document filled the screen, their signatures clear at the bottom. Actually, you're not my family, you're my tenants. And according to this lease you signed, I can evict you for multiple violations. We didn't know Phoenix Holdings was you. Patricia protested, her face flushing beneath her carefully applied foundation. That's irrelevant. You signed a binding legal agreement. Ignorance of ownership doesn't void the contract. But we've been paying rent. Madison grabbed the papers back from her mother, scanning frantically. $7,000 a month, that has to count for something. It counts as fulfilling one obligation while violating numerous others, I explained. Let me list them for you. I pulled up the photos on my phone, each one date-stamped and clear. First, the pet violation. The lease allows 2 pets maximum. You have 3 dogs, Madison. They're emotional support animals, she protested. Only Precious has documentation, and it's from an online site that sells certificates without verification. Mr. Hutchinson already confirmed it won't hold up legally. Princess and Duchess are simply pets, putting you one over the limit. This is discrimination, Madison shrieked. I have anxiety. Having anxiety doesn't exempt you from lease terms, I continued. Second violation, the garage conversion. Patricia, you removed a load-bearing wall to create your jewelry workshop without permits or permission. Patricia's face went from red to white. That was an improvement. We increased the property value. You created a structural hazard. The city could condemn it. Which brings me to the third violation, running a commercial business from a residential property. Your Etsy shop, Patricia's Precious Pieces, lists this address as its base of operations. It's a hobby, Patricia sputtered. You filed a Schedule C on your taxes last year claiming business expenses. That makes it commercial activity. My father stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Jamie, this is vindictive. We can work something out. Can we, like we worked out a fair rent for my attic room, like we worked out sharing household responsibilities, like we worked out basic respect for my contributions to this family? I turned back to my phone. Fourth violation, subletting without permission. Madison, your ex-boyfriend Trevor was growing cannabis in the basement. That's both a lease violation and potentially criminal. I didn't know. Madison's protest rang hollow. The grow lights on your last 3 electric bills suggest otherwise, which brings me to the utility usage exceeding reasonable residential standards, another violation. This is insane. Patricia grabbed my father's arm. Richard, call our lawyer. By all means, I said. Have them review the lease. Mr. Hutchinson is one of the best property lawyers in Philadelphia. He's made sure everything is ironclad. Madison had started crying, mascara running in black streams down her cheeks. Where are we supposed to go? Do you want us homeless? I want you gone, I said simply. Where you go is your responsibility. You have 21 days to figure it out. But my party, Madison wailed. I've been planning it for months. It's going to be featured on Party Girls Philly's Instagram. Then you'll need to find a new venue. With 2 weeks' notice, do you know how hard it is to book a space in this city? I imagine it's about as hard as working 12-hour shifts and then coming home to cook dinner for people who won't even eat with you. Patricia had pulled out her own phone, furiously texting. I'm calling Bradley Worthington. He'll shut this down immediately. The divorce lawyer, I asked. I don't think property law is his specialty, but you're welcome to try. How do you know who my lawyer is? Patricia's eyes narrowed. You've screamed his name during every argument with Dad for the past 3 years. The walls in this house aren't that thick, especially from the attic. My father turned from the window. Jamie, you're upset, I understand, but throwing us out won't change the past. No, but it will change the future, my future. Well, what about my future? Madison had moved from crying to rage, her voice sharp. I'm 25, I'm just getting established. You're going to ruin everything because you're bitter about doing some chores. Some chores. I felt my carefully maintained calm beginning to crack. Madison, I've been your personal chef, maid, and laundress for 7 years. I've cleaned your bathroom, washed your clothes, cooked your meals, all while you've contributed nothing. Not rent, not help, not even basic courtesy. I didn't ask you to do those things. No, you just left your laundry on the floor until someone else dealt with it. You left dishes in your room until they grew mold and I had to clean them. You treated me like staff while I paid rent in my own inherited house. We didn't know it was your house, Patricia interjected. And that makes it acceptable. If I weren't the owner, would it be fine to treat me as your servant? The silence that followed was damning. That's what I thought, I said quietly. Your treatment of me has nothing to do with property ownership and everything to do with character. Well, now my character is saying enough. Patricia's phone rang. She answered with a sharp, Bradley, yes, it's an emergency. She stalked into the dining room, her voice carrying back. My stepdaughter is trying to evict us. Yes, evict. Madison had curled up on the couch, all 3 dogs climbing onto her lap despite their combined weight exceeding 100 pounds. This is all your fault, she muttered to me. If you hadn't been so pathetic, so eager to please, we wouldn't have gotten used to you doing everything. So it's my fault you took advantage of my kindness. It's not taking advantage when someone volunteers. I volunteered to help family. You turned it into an expectation, then an obligation, then treated me with contempt for fulfilling it. My father sat heavily in his chair. Your mother wouldn't have wanted this, Jamie. She believed in family sticking together. Don't you dare, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Don't you dare invoke Mom when you've let Patricia systematically erase her from this house, when you've stood by as they've treated her daughter like a servant. Mom believed in family, yes, but she also believed in dignity, respect, and standing up to bullies. Patricia's not a bully, he said weakly. She called me the help to my face. She's charged me rent for an unheated attic room while her daughter lives in a master suite for free. She's redecorated this entire house to remove any trace of the woman you claim to love. If that's not bullying, what is? Patricia returned her expression triumphant. Bradley says eviction proceedings can be challenged. He's filing an injunction first thing Monday morning. He's welcome to try, I said, though he might want to research property law first and explain to a judge why you should be allowed to stay after violating multiple lease terms. We'll claim emotional distress, Patricia announced. Deliberate infliction of psychological harm. You've been planning this, gathering evidence against us. That's malicious intent. I've been documenting lease violations, which is my right as a property owner. But please tell a judge you're emotionally distressed by the consequences of your own actions. I'm sure that will go well. Madison suddenly sat up, her tear-stained face lighting with vindication. You recorded us without consent. That's illegal in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a 2-party consent state for audio recordings. I agreed, which is why I only took photographs of lease violations and documented observable behavior. No recordings needed when you've been so blatant about everything. The doorbell rang, cutting through the tension. We all froze. Did someone order something? I asked. Patricia and Madison shook their heads. My father shrugged. I moved to answer it, finding a young process server on the porch. I have documents for Patricia Morrison and Richard Richardson. That was fast, Bradley, Patricia muttered, reaching for the papers. But when she opened them, her face went white again. These aren't from Bradley. I recognized the letterhead, a credit card company. Then another envelope and another. Overdue notices. Collection attempts. Final warnings. "What are those?" Madison asked, peering over her mother's shoulder. Patricia tried to gather the papers, but Madison had already seen. "Mom, these are all in Dad's name." My father's head snapped up. "What?" "You maxed out credit cards in my name." He crossed to Patricia in 3 strides, snatching the papers. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally rage. $47,000, Patricia! What have you done?" "I needed capital for my jewelry business," Patricia said defensively. "You said you supported my dreams." "Not with fraud, these cards. I never applied for these. I was going to pay them back when the business took off." "With what money you've sold 12 pieces in 2 years?" Their argument escalated, voices overlapping in accusation and defense. Madison tried to interject, demanding to know if this affected her credit too. The dogs barked. The doorbell rang again. More process servers, more documents, more revelations spilling into the open. I stood in the eye of the hurricane, watching the family that had dismissed and diminished me tear itself apart. There was no satisfaction in it, only a deep weariness. "I'll be at the Hampton Inn if Mr. Hutchinson needs to reach me," I said, though no one was listening. "Remember 21 days." I left them to their chaos, stepping out into the crisp November morning. Mrs. Chen was definitely watching now, not even pretending to garden. I gave her a small wave. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A text from a coworker at the hospital. "Heard you finally stood up to your step-family. About time, drinks tonight to celebrate." For the first time in 7 years, I typed back, "Yes, I'd love that." 21 days. The countdown had begun, but my new life had already started. Behind me, through the windows of the house I owned, I could see shadows moving frantically, voices raised in anger and blame. They'd turned on each other the moment their comfortable arrangement was threatened, revealing the shallow foundation of their unity. I drove away without looking back, heading to the hotel that felt more like home than that house had in years. 21 days until I could walk through my own front door without dread cook in my own kitchen, without criticism, and exist in my own space without apologizing for it. 21 days. I could wait. I'd already waited 7 years. What was 3 more weeks compared to a lifetime of freedom? 2 weeks into their 21-day notice, Madison had apparently decided that denial was her best strategy. Despite the chaos of packing boxes, despite Patricia's daily meetings with lawyers who all told her the same thing, despite my father's grim silence as he sorted through credit card fraud paperwork, Madison was throwing her birthday party anyway. I arrived home from a particularly brutal 12-hour shift to find my quiet street transformed into what looked like a music festival parking lot. Cars lined both sides of Magnolia Street, some blocking driveways, others parked on carefully maintained lawns. Bass thumped from my house with enough force to rattle the windows of neighboring homes. I had to park 3 blocks away and walk back still in my scrubs, exhaustion weighing down every step. It was 11:30 at night. The party had apparently been going since 8 based on the Instagram stories I'd seen during my dinner break. Madison, ever the aspiring influencer, had been documenting everything. As I approached my front door, I could see through the windows. The house was packed with people I didn't recognize. Red Solo cups in hand bodies pressed together in what used to be my mother's living room. Someone had moved the furniture. My grandmother's antique sideboard was shoved against a wall, drinks and mysterious stains already marking its surface. I tried my key. The lock had been changed. For a moment, I stood on my own front porch, locked out of my own house, listening to strangers destroy my property. Then I spotted movement in the dining room window. Madison, wearing a tiara that said "Birthday Princess" in glittering letters, was standing on the dining table. Not just any table. My grandmother's mahogany dining table, a family heirloom that had hosted 50 years of Thanksgivings and Christmases. Madison stood on it in 6-inch stilettos, pouring champagne directly into the mouths of cheering guests below. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "I'd like to report a noise violation and trespassing." I said calmly when the dispatcher answered. I'm the property owner, and approximately 50 people are in my house without permission. The tenants who are under eviction proceedings changed the locks and are hosting a party against my explicit instructions. The dispatcher took my information efficiently. We'll send units immediately. Please stay safely away from the property until officers arrive. I moved to stand by Mrs. Chen's garden gate where I had a clear view but remained out of the chaos. While waiting, I called Mr. Hutchinson's emergency line. Jamie. His voice was alert despite the late hour. What's wrong? They changed the locks and are throwing a massive party. I've called the police. Document everything, he instructed immediately. Every person, every damage, every violation. This is gift-wrapped evidence for expedited eviction. I'll file emergency papers first thing Monday morning. The police arrived 12 minutes later, 2 units with lights flashing but sirens off. I met them at the curb, showing my ID and property ownership documents I'd learned to keep with me. They're current tenants under eviction, I explained. They changed the locks today and are hosting this party despite my explicit refusal of permission. The lead officer, a sergeant named Williams, nodded. We'll handle it. You might want to stay back here. I watched as 4 officers approached my front door. The music cut off abruptly when they entered. Through the windows, I could see the party atmosphere transform into panic. People streamed out the back door, some jumping the fence into neighboring yards. Madison's shrieks were audible even from the street. You can't do this. Her voice carried clearly through the night air. It's my birthday. This is my house. 10 minutes later, Sergeant Williams returned. We've issued citations for noise violations, underage drinking. There were at least a dozen minors with alcohol and several other violations. The young woman claiming to be a resident became combative. We're arresting her for disorderly conduct and resisting. I watched as 2 officers escorted Madison out in handcuffs, her tiara askew, mascara streaking her face. She saw me standing by Mrs. Chen's gate and exploded. You, she screamed, lunging forward. The officers held her back. You did this. You're ruining my life. You're just jealous because you're almost 30 with no friends, no boyfriend, and no life. You're pathetic. A pathetic, bitter nurse who can't stand seeing other people happy. Neighbors had emerged onto their porches, watching the drama unfold. Madison continued screaming as they guided her into the patrol car, her voice muffled but still audible through the windows. Patricia appeared in the doorway, still in her cocktail dress, trying to maintain dignity while swaying slightly. Officers, there's been a misunderstanding. My daughter has every right to celebrate in her own home. Ma'am, the property owner has confirmed no permission was given for this gathering, Sergeant Williams explained. We'll need everyone to vacate immediately. I live here, Patricia protested. The owner is beginning eviction proceedings. You changed the locks illegally. Everyone needs to leave now or we'll arrest anyone who refuses for trespassing. My father emerged behind Patricia, looking older than I'd ever seen him. He saw me across the street and something in his expression broke. He said something to Patricia, who whirled to follow his gaze. This is your fault, Patricia shrieked at me. Your jealousy, your vindictiveness, you've destroyed this family. Ma'am, I need you to step back inside and gather your things, the sergeant instructed. You have 10 minutes to leave the premises. The next 20 minutes were chaos. Guests scattered like roaches when lights come on. Patricia and my father gathered essentials while officers supervised. A locksmith I'd called arrived to restore the original locks. I documented everything on my phone, the champagne stains on the ceiling, the broken vase in the hallway, the scratches on my grandmother's table from Madison's heels. By the time the house was cleared, it was past 1 a.m. Sergeant Williams handed me a thick stack of reports. The one in custody will be held until arraignment tomorrow. These are your copies of all citations issued. Your lawyer will want these for your civil case. I thanked him, and the other officers then stood alone in my destroyed living room. Cigarette burns marked the original hardwood. Someone had vomited in the corner. Madison's party decorations, 25 and thriving banners in metallic pink, mocked me from every wall. I started taking more photos, methodically documenting every bit of damage. My phone rang Mr. Hutchinson again. "I've already started the emergency filing," he said without preamble. "The arrest is the nail in their coffin. No judge will side with tenants who changed locks and threw a party resulting in criminal charges. How bad is the damage? Thousands of dollars at least, maybe tens of thousands." I nudged a broken picture frame with my foot, one of the few photos of my mother that had survived Patricia's purges, now shattered and sticky with spilled beer. "Document everything, get repair estimates. We'll add it to the eviction filing and sue for damages. They've handed us everything we need for immediate removal." After he hung up, I stood in the ruins of my childhood home, feeling oddly empty. This wasn't how I'd wanted things to go. I'd imagined a clean transition, maybe even maintaining some kind of civil relationship with my father afterward. Instead, I was standing in a house that reeked of alcohol and smoke my stepsister in jail, my stepmother probably consulting every lawyer in the city. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Mrs. Chen stood on the porch wearing a robe over her pajamas, holding a steaming mug. "Tea," she said, simply pressing it into my hands. "You look like you need it." "Thank you." The warmth of the mug grounded me. "I'm sorry about the noise, the disruption." "Don't apologize. I've watched them treat you terribly for years. Watched you leave for long shifts and come home to cook and clean for people who couldn't even say thank you." She patted my arm. "Your mother would be proud of you for finally standing up." "Would she?" I asked, suddenly exhausted. I just had my stepsister arrested on her birthday. "You had a trespasser arrested for destroying your property," Mrs. Chen corrected. "After giving them more chances than they deserved. I saw you trying to get in earlier, saw them lock you out of your own home. That's not family, dear. That's just people taking advantage." She left me with the tea and a promise to provide witness statements if needed. I sipped the warm liquid chamomile with honey and surveyed the damage again. It would take professional cleaners to handle this mess. The repairs would take weeks. My phone buzzed with notifications. Madison's arrest had already made it to social media, complete with blurry videos of her being led away in handcuffs. The comments ranged from shock to schadenfreude. Several were from people who'd apparently been at the party complaining about the psycho landlord who'd ruined everything. One comment stood out from someone I recognized as a former classmate of Madison's. "About time someone called her on her BS. She's been treating her stepsister like garbage for years. Karma's real." I locked the restored front door and headed to my car, leaving the house empty and wounded behind me. The hotel room waited a clean sanctuary from the chaos. As I drove through the quiet streets, my phone rang again. The caller ID showed the city jail. I declined the call. Madison could wait until morning. Everything could wait until morning. But morning came too soon, bringing with it a flood of texts, calls, and emails. Patricia had apparently spent the night rallying their extended network, painting me as a vindictive monster who deliberately ruined Madison's birthday. My father had left 3 voicemails, each more desperate than the last. I ignored them all and went to work. The pediatric ICU was busy requiring all my focus. I administered medications, monitored vital signs, comforted frightened children and exhausted parents. This was where I belonged, where my efforts mattered, where respect was freely given and received. During my lunch break, Mr. Hutchinson called with an update. The emergency eviction was approved. They have 48 hours to vacate starting from when they're served this afternoon. The judge was not impressed by the lock changing and party situation. 48 hours. I repeated, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. The arrest sealed it. No judge wants to leave a property owner vulnerable to tenants who've shown such blatant disregard for law and property. I've also filed civil suits for damages and back rent for your attic room. Turns out charging you rent in a house you inherited could be considered fraud. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. When I finally left the hospital that evening, I had 37 missed calls and over 100 text messages. The eviction had been served. I drove past the house on my way to the hotel. A moving truck sat in the driveway. Through the windows, I could see figures packing frantically. Part of me felt guilty. Most of me felt free. 48 hours. Then I could go home, really home, for the first time in 7 years. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching the mood that seemed to hang over Magnolia Street like fog. I sat in my rental car outside the house, watching the moving truck in the driveway, as two men loaded furniture under Patricia's sharp-eyed supervision. She stood under an umbrella, directing them with imperious gestures, still trying to maintain control even as her world crumbled. I'd taken the day off work. Mr. Hutchinson had advised me to be present during the move-out to document any additional damage or items they might try to take that weren't theirs. The 48-hour emergency eviction meant they'd be gone by tomorrow evening, but I wanted to ensure nothing went missing in the chaos. Madison was notably absent. After her arrest, she'd been released on bail posted by one of Patricia's friends. According to the social media posts I'd seen, she was staying with someone named Brittany, nursing both a hangover and her wounded pride. I was checking my email when movement caught my eye. Patricia had spotted my car. She said something to the movers, then began walking toward me with determined strides, designer heels clicking on the wet pavement. I locked my doors and rolled down the window just a few inches. Patricia approached with an expression I'd never seen before, a calculated vulnerability, like an actress preparing for an emotional scene. As she drew closer, I noticed her makeup was softer than usual, her typically perfect hair slightly mussed, as if she'd been too distraught to style it properly. Even her clothing seemed chosen for effect, a simple sweater and slacks instead of her usual sharp suits. "Jamie," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Jamie, honey, we need to talk." The endearment was so foreign from her lips that I almost laughed. In 7 years, she'd never once called me honey dear or any other term of affection. "There's nothing to discuss," I said through the cracked window. "The eviction stands. You have until tomorrow evening. Please." She moved closer, Rain beginning to spot her cream-colored sweater. "Can we talk inside just for a few minutes? I'm getting soaked." "The movers seem to be doing fine. You should supervise them." Her mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of the real Patricia, all sharp edges and calculation. Then the vulnerable expression returned, accompanied by what looked suspiciously like tears. "Jamie, we're family," she said, her voice catching. "Your father is devastated. This whole situation has spiraled out of control, and I take responsibility for that. I should have treated you better." The admission was so unexpected that I found myself studying her more carefully. Patricia never admitted fault, ever. In 7 years, I'd never heard her apologize for anything, not even when she'd accidentally backed into Mrs. Chen's mailbox and tried to blame it on delivery drivers. I agreed, keeping my voice neutral. "I was threatened," she continued, warming to her theme. "When I married your father, you were already so accomplished, so capable. I felt like I could never measure up to your mother's memory or to you. I handled it badly." The rain was picking up genuine tears, now mixing with raindrops on her face. Or maybe they weren't genuine with Patricia. It was impossible to tell. "Can we please go inside?" she pleaded. "Just to talk. The movers know what to do. I need to explain, to apologize properly, to make things right." Against my better judgment, I found myself considering it. Maybe it was the nurse in me trained to help people in distress. Maybe it was the daughter who still hoped for some kind of reconciliation with her father. Or maybe I just wanted to hear what story Patricia had crafted to try to save herself. 5 minutes, I said finally. "In the foyer. The movers stay outside." Relief flooded her features. Thank you so much." I followed her up the familiar walkway, noting how she'd already started removing the holiday decorations she'd put up just last week. The house felt different now, hollow, transitional, caught between what it had been and what it would become. In the foyer, Patricia turned to face me. Without the rain as a prop, her performance had to rely on pure emotion. She was good, I had to give her that. "Jamie, I've been awful to you." She began wringing her hands. "I see that now. When Madison was arrested, when your father showed me those credit card bills, when I realized we were actually going to lose this house, it all became clear." She paused, seemingly overcome. "I've been jealous, petty, cruel. Your father loves this house because it reminds him of your mother, and instead of respecting that I tried to erase her, I made you sleep in that cold attic when there were empty bedrooms. I charged you rent in your own home. I let Madison treat you like staff. I treated you like staff." Each admission seemed calculated for maximum impact, but there was something else in her voice too. Fear, maybe, or the recognition that she'd overplayed her hand. "And now," I asked. "Now I want to make it right." She stepped closer and I caught the scent of her perfume, something expensive and cloying. "We're family, Jamie. Your father loves this house. It's all he has left of your mother. It would break his heart to leave." Ah, there it was, the guilt card. "We could start over," she continued, gaining momentum. "I'll apologize to you properly publicly if you want. Madison will too. We'll pay more rent, $8,000, $9,000, whatever you think is fair. We'll give you the master bedroom. You'll be treated as the homeowner you are. The homeowner I am would have tenants who respect the property and the lease agreement," I pointed out. "We'll sign a new lease with any terms you want. No pets, I'll make Madison rehome the dogs. No business from the house. No parties. We'll be model tenants." She reached out as if to touch my arm and I stepped back. Something flashed in her eyes, frustration maybe, or calculation. "Please," she said, trying another tactic. "Think about your father. He's not young anymore. The stress of moving, of starting over. And with the credit card situation, his credit is ruined. Who's going to rent to us?" "That's not my problem to solve." "But it could be," she pressed. "Let us stay and I'll take responsibility for the credit cards. I'll work with him to repair his credit. I'll get a full-time job, contribute properly. Madison too. We'll be the family you deserved all along." The promise rang hollow. 7 years of behavior couldn't be erased by desperation and pretty words. Where's this coming from, Patricia? This sudden change of heart? She drew herself up, perhaps sensing her emotional appeal wasn't working. "I spoke to my therapist last night," she said, producing tears again. "Emergency session. She helped me see how my own childhood trauma, my mother always favored my sister, made me recreate those patterns. I projected onto you, made you the scapegoat because I couldn't face my own insecurities." The therapy speak was almost impressive. She'd done her homework overnight, crafting a narrative that painted her as a victim of her own psychology, rather than a calculating manipulator. "Your therapist sounds insightful," I said dryly. "She is." Patricia latched onto this. "She wants to do family sessions, all of us working through this together, healing the wounds, building something better. Doesn't that sound wonderful?" "It sounds like something you should have considered 7 years ago." Her mask slipped again. "I'm trying here, Jamie. I'm humbling myself, admitting fault, offering to change. What more do you want?" "I want you out of my house." The words hung between us like a blade. Patricia's carefully constructed expression crumbled, replaced by something rawer. "You're really going to do this?" she said, disbelief coloring her tone. "You're really going to throw your own father out on the street because of petty resentments?" "I'm evicting tenants who violated their lease, changed my locks, and destroyed my property. The fact that one of those tenants happens to be my father is irrelevant to the legal facts." "Legal facts." Patricia's voice rose. "Is that all that matters to you? What about compassion? What about forgiveness? What about family? You should have thought about family when you called me the help, when you made me eat in the kitchen while you dined at my mother's table, when you charged me rent for an attic room in my own house while your daughter lived rent-free. People make mistakes. 7 years of consistent behavior isn't a mistake. It's a pattern. It's who you are." Patricia's face hardened, the last pretense of vulnerability disappearing. "Fine. You want to be vindictive? You want to destroy your relationship with your father? That's on you. But know this. He'll never forgive you. You're throwing away your only real family for what pride revenge. I'm reclaiming my home and my dignity. If that costs me a father who stood by while I was mistreated, then that's a price I've already paid." She stared at me for a long moment, perhaps finally understanding that no amount of manipulation would work. Then she straightened, pulling her designer armor back around herself. "You'll regret this," she said coldly. "When you're alone in this big house with no one but your self-righteousness for company, you'll regret it." "Maybe, but I'll be alone by choice, not because I've driven away anyone who won't serve me." Patricia turned on her heel, stalking toward the stairs. At the archway, she paused, looking back with pure venom in her eyes. "Your mother would be ashamed of you." The words were meant to wound, but they fell flat. I'd already faced that particular demon and found it toothless. "My mother," I said quietly, "would be ashamed of my father for marrying someone who treats her daughter like a servant. She'd be ashamed it took me 7 years to stand up for myself. But mostly, she'd be ashamed that the man she loved chose comfort over conscience, chose a new wife over his daughter's well-being." Patricia had no response to that. She disappeared upstairs, her footsteps heavy with defeat. I returned to the foyer, watching through the window as the movers continued their work. My phone buzzed a text from my father. "Patricia says she tried to make peace and you refused. I'm disappointed in you, Jamie. I thought I raised you better than this." I stared at the message, feeling the last threads of obligation fray and snap. Even now, even after everything, he took her version at face value. He couldn't see or wouldn't see the manipulation, the calculated performance, the desperation dressed up as remorse. I typed back, "She tried to manipulate me into letting you stay. There's a difference between peace and capitulation. I thought you knew me better than this." His response was immediate, "This is your final decision." "It is." "Then you're no daughter of mine." The words should have hurt more than they did. Instead, I felt only a tired sort of relief. He'd chosen his side, definitively burning the bridge I'd been hesitant to cross. I deleted his number from my phone. Outside, the movers loaded a couch. I didn't recognize something Patricia must have bought to replace my mother's comfortable old sofa. Good. Let her take every trace of herself from this place. Tomorrow evening, they would be gone. The house would be empty, wounded, but mine. I could begin the work of restoration, not just of the property, but of the life I'd put on hold for 7 years. Patricia's desperate gambit had failed. The masks had fallen. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. That evening, as the rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, I heard footsteps on the narrow stairs leading to my attic room. They were heavier than Patricia's quick clicks or Madison stomping my father's measured tread, each step deliberate and careful. I was sitting on my bed sorting through belongings I'd need to take back to the hotel. The knock on my door was soft, almost hesitant. "Jamie, it's Dad. Can we talk?" For a moment I considered refusing, but something in his tone, a weariness that matched my own, made me relent. "Come in." He entered slowly, having to duck under the low beam just as I did every day. It was the first time he'd been in this room in years, and I watched him take in the cramped space, the single bed pushed against one wall, the small dresser that doubled as a desk, the tiny window that provided the only natural light. "It's smaller than I remembered," he said quietly. "It's the same size it's always been, you just haven't looked." He stood awkwardly in the limited floor space, finally settling on the wooden chair I'd rescued from a garage sale. The silence stretched between us, heavy with 7 years of unspoken truths. "Patricia told me about your conversation," he began. "I'm sure she did." "She was trying to make peace, Jamie, trying to find a solution that worked for everyone. She was trying to manipulate me into letting you stay by suddenly discovering remorse she's never felt before." His jaw tightened. "That's unfair. People can change, admit their mistakes." "Dad." I cut him off, exhausted by the familiar pattern. In 7 years, has Patricia ever even once admitted she was wrong about anything? Has she ever apologized for anything? Has she ever shown the slightest consideration for my feelings or well-being? He opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to provide a single example. "Exactly," I continued. But the moment her comfortable life is threatened, she suddenly discovers therapy speak and crocodile tears. And you believe her because you always believe her, because it's easier than facing what you've allowed to happen in this house. What I've allowed, his voice sharpened. I've tried to keep peace in my home to balance everyone's needs by sacrificing mine. The words came out flat, matter of fact. Every single time there was a conflict, you chose their comfort over my well-being. Every time. That's not true. Name one time I challenged. One single instance where you stood up for me against Patricia or Madison. One time you said enough when they were treating me like hired help. The silence stretched again. My father's face had gone red, but whether from anger or shame I couldn't tell. You're being dramatic, he said finally. Yes, Patricia has her difficult moments and Madison is spoiled, but calling you hired help. She literally called me the maid at dinner the night this all started. To my face, in front of company. You were sitting right there. I didn't hear. You never hear. My voice rose for the first time. You've perfected selective deafness. Every cruel comment, every unfair demand, every moment where a father should have protected his daughter, you conveniently didn't hear, didn't see, didn't notice. I've been trying to make a blended family work. He stood abruptly pacing the 2 steps the room allowed. Do you have any idea how hard it is to balance a new wife, a stepdaughter, and you? I've been walking on eggshells for 7 years. While I've been sleeping in an attic and paying rent in my own inherited house. We didn't know it was your house. Would that have made it acceptable? If Aunt Helen hadn't left me this place, would it be fine that I pay $700 for an unheated attic room, while Madison lives rent-free in a suite? He turned to face me, and for the first time in years, I saw real emotion crack through his accountant's facade. You're acting just like your mother, stubborn and unforgiving. The comparison meant as criticism felt like a gift. Mom was stubborn about things that mattered, I said. She was unforgiving of cruelty and injustice. If that makes me like her, I'm honored. Your mother also believed in family and forgiveness, in second chances. Mom believed in standing up for what's right. She taught me to know my worth, to demand respect, to fight for fairness. Somewhere along the way, I forgot those lessons. But Aunt Helen remembered, and she made sure I'd have the tools to remember too. Helen was a meddling old woman who never approved of my remarriage, he spat. Helen was the only family member who kept checking on me after Mom died, the only one who noticed I was being turned into a servant, the only one who cared enough to do something about it. By going behind our backs, by secretly buying our house, by ensuring I'd have security and dignity, by giving me the power to demand better treatment, by showing more love and concern in death than you've shown in life. The words hung between us like a blade. My father's face went from red to white, aging 10 years in seconds. How dare you, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I've fed you, housed you, kept you safe. You've allowed your wife and stepdaughter to treat me like unpaid help. You've stood by while they erased Mom from this house. You've chosen their comfort over my dignity every single day for 7 years. I chose happiness. The words exploded from him. I chose to move forward instead of wallowing in grief. I chose a woman who made me laugh again, who brought light back into my life. And I paid the price for your happiness. You volunteered. No one forced you to cook and clean. I volunteered to help family through a transition. You all turned it into an expectation, then an obligation, then treated me with contempt for fulfilling it. And you let them, because your happiness mattered more than your daughter's well-being. He sank back onto the chair, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. Patricia makes me happy, he said quietly. For the first time since your mother died, I'm happy. At what cost, Dad? At what cost? You don't understand, he continued, not seeming to hear me. When your mother died, I thought I'd never feel anything again. Patricia brought me back to life. Yes, she has her flaws. Yes, Madison is difficult, but they're my family now. And I'm not. He looked up at me then, and I saw the truth in his eyes before he spoke it. You remind me of her, he said simply. Every day, every gesture, every word, you're so much like your mother, it hurts to look at you sometimes. Patricia and Madison, they're easier. They don't carry ghosts. The admission should have destroyed me. Instead, I felt a strange clarity, like finally understanding a math problem that had puzzled me for years. So you let them push me into the attic, I said slowly. Let them erase Mom from the house. Let them treat me like a servant, because it was easier than dealing with your grief. I'm not proud of it. But you're not sorry either. Not really. You're only here because Patricia's plan failed, and now you need somewhere to live. That's not... He stopped, unable to finish the lie. Where are we supposed to go, Jamie? With my credit ruined, who's going to rent to us? That's not my problem to solve. I'm your father. Yes, I agreed. You are. And for 16 years after Mom died, I needed a father. I needed protection guidance, someone to stand up for me. Instead, I got a man who chose the path of least resistance, who sacrificed his daughter's well-being for his own comfort, who let strangers turn me into a servant in my own home because it was easier than having difficult conversations. Strangers, Patricia is my wife. Patricia is a woman who saw an opportunity, a grieving widower with a nice house, and a daughter who could be manipulated into domestic service. And you let her do it because she made you happy. He stood abruptly, looming in the small space. You're being cruel, vindictive. This isn't you, Jamie. No, I said quietly. This is exactly me. The me that Mom raised strong, principled, unwilling to accept less than I deserve. The me that you've spent 7 years trying to suppress because she was inconvenient to your new life. If you do this, he said, his voice hard, if you throw us out, we're done. I won't have a daughter who could be so heartless. Heartless. I almost laughed. Dad, I've cooked thousands of meals I wasn't invited to share. I've cleaned this house while being told I should be grateful for the privilege of paying rent. I've worked 12-hour shifts and come home to demands and criticism. I've given 7 years of my life to people who couldn't even say thank you. If anyone's heartless here, it's not me. He stared at me for a long moment, perhaps finally seeing the woman I'd become instead of the ghost he'd been avoiding. Your mother would be disappointed in you, he said, finally pulling out the same weapon Patricia had tried. Mom would be disappointed in both of us, I replied. Me for taking 7 years to stand up for myself. You for being the reason I had to. He turned toward the door, then paused. Is there anything I can say to change your mind? You could start with, I'm sorry. You could acknowledge what you've allowed to happen. You could take responsibility for your choices. You could act like a father instead of Patricia's enabler. The silence stretched. He couldn't say it. Even now, even with everything on the line, he couldn't admit fault, couldn't acknowledge the harm, couldn't choose his daughter over his comfort. Then we have nothing left to discuss, I said quietly. He left without another word, his footsteps heavy on the narrow stairs. I heard him speaking to Patricia below their voices, a low murmur of planning and recrimination. I sat on my small bed in my cold attic room surrounded by 7 years of compressed living and felt nothing. The father I'd been clinging to, the relationship I'd been trying to preserve it, had been dead for years. I'd just been too afraid to hold the funeral. But now I could bury it properly and move forward. Tomorrow they would all be gone. The house would be empty and wounded, but mine to heal. And maybe finally I could heal too. The rain had stopped. Through my tiny window, I could see stars emerging between the clouds. Somewhere up there, Mom and Aunt Helen were watching. I hoped they understood. I hoped they approved. Most of all, I hoped they knew that their lessons about strength, dignity, and self-worth had finally taken root, even if it had taken far too long to bloom. With only 5 days left on their eviction notice, Thanksgiving arrived like a storm cloud, heavy with the promise of disaster. Patricia, in what could only be described as a spectacular display of denial, had invited her entire extended family for dinner. She'd been planning this for weeks before the eviction notice, and apparently the small matter of being legally required to vacate the premises wasn't going to stop her from hosting. I'd taken the day off from work not to cook the elaborate feast I'd prepared for the past 7 years, but to protect my property and document any additional lease violations. I arrived at the house at 6 in the morning, finding it already bustling with activity. Patricia was in the kitchen directing Madison and 2 catering assistants she'd hired. The smell of turkey filled the air, competing with Patricia's sharp commands. Through the window, I could see rental chairs and tables being unloaded in the backyard despite the November cold. "What are you doing here?" Madison spotted me first, her voice dripping with hostility. She was wearing an apron that said, "Kitchen Princess." Ironic, considering I'd never seen her cook anything more complex than microwave popcorn. "Protecting my property," I said calmly, "and documenting continued lease violations." Patricia whirled around, brandishing a basting brush like a weapon. "Don't you dare ruin this holiday. My family is coming from Connecticut, New Jersey, and Delaware. This dinner has been planned for months. Your eviction has been in effect for over a week. You're supposed to be packing, not party planning. It's Thanksgiving." Patricia's voice rose to a pitch that made the catering assistants exchange nervous glances. "A day for family, for gratitude, for respecting legal notices and property rights," I finished. "Every person you invite is another unauthorized guest on my property." "You're not seriously going to call the police on Thanksgiving?" Madison challenged. I pulled out my phone, showing them I had the non-emergency number ready. Try me. The standoff might have continued, but the doorbell rang. Patricia's sister Vivian had arrived early, along with her husband Robert and their 3 teenagers. I watched Patricia's face cycle through panic defiance and finally a brittle determination. "Act normal," she hissed at Madison, plastering on a smile as she went to greet her guests. What followed was perhaps the most surreal Thanksgiving I'd ever experienced. I set up my laptop in the formal dining room, the room I'd been banned from using for 7 years, and began working on documentation while Patricia's family arrived in waves. Each new arrival was greeted with increasingly frantic cheer by Patricia, who was trying desperately to maintain the illusion that everything was fine. She'd told them nothing about the eviction, nothing about the credit card fraud, nothing about Madison's arrest. As far as they knew, this was just another family gathering at Patricia's lovely home. "Patricia, darling, the house looks wonderful," Vivian gushed, air-kissing her sister. "Though I don't remember this furniture. Did you redecorate?" Patricia's laugh was strained. "Just a few changes. You know me, always updating." What Vivian didn't know was that half the furniture was already sold or packed, replaced with rentals, to maintain appearances. The family photos had been removed from walls, leaving telltale clean squares on the paint. Boxes were hidden in closets, and the garage the detritus of a life being hastily dismantled. By noon, 23 members of Patricia's extended family had arrived. They filled the house with conversation and laughter, oblivious to the underlying tension. I remained in the dining room, visible but separate, a specter at their feast. "Who's that?" I heard Vivian's teenage daughter whisper. "She's just sitting there working on Thanksgiving." "That's Jamie," Madison replied, loudly enough for me to hear. "The tenant. She's being evicted for not paying rent, but she won't leave. We've had to call lawyers." The lie was so brazen I actually laughed out loud, drawing stares from the assembled family. Patricia appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of forced calm. "Jamie, could I speak with you privately?" "No," I said, simply returning to my documentation. "But feel free to tell your family the truth about why you're being evicted. Start with the illegal garage conversion, or Madison's arrest, or the credit card fraud." The dining room fell silent. Vivian looked between Patricia and me, confusion clear on her perfectly made-up face. "Evicted Patricia? What is she talking about?" "It's a misunderstanding," Patricia said quickly. "A silly dispute about her violating multiple terms of the lease agreement on this property which I own," I interjected calmly. including hosting this gathering without permission. You own... Robert Vivian's husband was a corporate lawyer, and his professional instincts kicked in immediately. Patricia, you told us you own this house. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Madison tried to salvage the situation with her usual grace. She's lying. She's just a bitter tenant who... I pulled out my phone, displaying the deed. I inherited this property from my great-aunt Helen 3 months ago. They've been my tenants currently under eviction for multiple lease violations and criminal activity. Criminal. Vivian's voice went up an octave. Patricia, what is going on? And then, like a dam breaking, the truth began to spill out. Not from Patricia, who was still trying to spin damage control, but from the questions and observations of her family. Why were there boxes stacked in the hallway? Why was Madison's boyfriend not attending? Why did the dining room have clean squares where pictures should be? Where's Richard? Someone asked, and Patricia's composure finally cracked. He's not feeling well. He's upstairs resting. But I'd seen my father leave early that morning, presumably to avoid the dinner entirely. His car wasn't in the driveway, and his absence spoke volumes. The catered dinner proceeded with the bizarre quality of a play where half the actors had forgotten their lines. Patricia tried to maintain normalcy, ushering everyone to the backyard where the rental company had set up heated tents. But whispers followed in her wake, questions multiplying like cells dividing. I remained in the dining room, clearly visible through the French doors. My presence was a constant reminder that something was terribly wrong with Patricia's perfect Thanksgiving tableau. The breaking point came when Vivian's son, a college student with more curiosity than tact, Googled the property address on his phone. Aunt Patricia. He announced to the table loud enough for everyone to hear, this house was sold 5 years ago to something called Phoenix Holdings, LLC. Public records show it's owned by someone named Jamie Richardson. Is that the woman inside? 23 pairs of eyes turned to Patricia, who had gone the color of her white linen napkins. Madison, in a spectacular display of poor judgment, chose that moment to explode. She's ruining everything, Madison shrieked, pointing at me through the glass doors. That vindictive witch inherited this place and decided to throw us out just to be cruel. We've lived here for 7 years, and she's evicting us because she's jealous that we're happy, and she's just a pathetic, lonely nurse who... Madison! Patricia's voice cut through her daughter's tirade like ice. Stop talking! But it was too late. The facade had crumbled entirely. Vivian was on her feet demanding explanations. Other family members were pulling out phones, presumably looking up eviction law's property records, and probably Madison's recent arrest. I chose that moment to act. I walked calmly to the French doors and opened them, addressing the assembled group. I apologize for interrupting your meal, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the stunned gathering. But I need to inform you all that this gathering is in violation of the eviction notice served on this property. Patricia and Madison have 5 days remaining to vacate. As the legal owner, I'm within my rights to ask you all to leave. You can't be serious, someone said. It's Thanksgiving. A holiday that Patricia chose to host despite being under legal eviction, I replied. Every moment you remain here is a further violation that strengthens my case for immediate removal. Patricia. Vivian's voice was deadly quiet. You told me you owned this house. You've been telling me for years about your beautiful home, your successful life. What else have you been lying about? The question opened floodgates. As Patricia's family began demanding answers, the careful construction of her public image crumbled like wet sand. The jewelry business that was supposedly thriving operated at a loss from an illegally converted garage. Madison's social media career, 3,000 followers and no real income. The loving marriage, Richard was nowhere to be found on a major holiday. And who exactly are you? Robert the lawyer addressed me directly. I'm Richard's daughter, I said simply. I've lived in the attic room of this house for 7 years, paying rent to my father and Patricia while working as a pediatric nurse. When I inherited this property, I discovered I'd been paying to live in my own house while being treated as unpaid domestic help. The attic. Vivian's voice was faint. Patricia, you made your stepdaughter live in the attic. She chose to, Patricia protested. She volunteered. We never forced. I have 7 years of text messages asking for help with rent, demanding I cook holiday meals and referring to me as the help. I interrupted. Would you like to see them? What followed was perhaps the most thorough public dismantling of a person's reputation I'd ever witnessed. Patricia's family, already suspicious, began piecing together years of small lies and exaggerations. The designer clothes that were really outlet purchases. The successful business that never seemed to generate income. The perfect family that was held together by exploitation and denial. Madison, seeing her mother's social standing crumble, turned on her with the viciousness of a cornered animal. "This is your fault," she screamed at Patricia. "You said we'd be fine. You said Jamie was too weak to ever stand up to us. You promised I'd get the house when you married Richard." That revelation sent another shockwave through the gathering. Patricia had apparently been promising her daughter an inheritance that was never hers to give. "I think," Vivian said with icy dignity, "that we should go. Robert, get the children." The exodus was swift and brutal. 23 members of Patricia's extended family packed up and left, some without even saying goodbye. Vivian paused at the French doors, looking back at her sister with something between pity and disgust. "I always wondered how you afforded this lifestyle on Richard's accountant's salary," she said quietly. "Now I know. You built it on the back of a grieving young woman. How do you sleep at night?" "Patricia." She left without waiting for an answer. Within an hour, the backyard was empty except for the rental furniture and the ruins of a feast. Patricia sat at the head of the abandoned table, looking older and smaller than I'd ever seen her. Madison had stormed off to her room, her sobs audible even from outside. I returned to the dining room, packing up my laptop and documentation. Through the window, I could see Patricia still sitting in the cold November air, surrounded by the wreckage of her carefully constructed life. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. "Patricia says you ruined Thanksgiving. I hope you're satisfied." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. As I prepared to leave, Patricia appeared in the doorway. Her makeup was ruined, her perfect hair disheveled, her holiday dress wrinkled and stained. "You destroyed me," she said quietly. "In front of my entire family, you destroyed me." "No," I corrected gently. "You destroyed yourself. I just stopped enabling the fiction." She had no response to that. I gathered my things and left, driving back to the hotel through streets quiet with holiday peace. Somewhere families were gathering in warmth and gratitude. Somewhere people were sharing meals without exploitation or cruelty. And somewhere in a beautiful Victorian house on Magnolia Street, Patricia Morrison sat alone among the ruins of a Thanksgiving that had revealed the truth she'd spent 7 years hiding. 5 more days, then I could begin rebuilding what they'd torn down, creating a home built on honesty instead of lies, respect instead of exploitation, and genuine love instead of calculated manipulation. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in 7 years, it would be real. The day after Thanksgiving, I woke to find my phone exploding with notifications. Dozens of tags on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. My stomach sank as I opened the first alert. Madison had gone nuclear. Her Instagram story was a masterclass in vindictive fiction. She'd posted a series of photos and videos, each carefully crafted to paint me as the villain in her family's tragedy. The first showed her tear-stained face with text overlay, "When your evil stepsister steals your childhood home and throws you out on the street." The video had already been viewed 12,000 times. I scrolled through the rest with growing disbelief. She'd posted photos of herself packing boxes, claiming I'd manipulated a dying old woman into leaving me the house. Another showed the Thanksgiving disaster's aftermath with the caption, "She even ruined our last family holiday in our home. Who does this?" But the worst was a TikTok video where she sobbed dramatically while packing her childhood memories. "I've lived in this house since I was 18. She wailed to the camera. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every important moment happened here. And now my stepsister, who we welcomed into our family, who we treated like a princess, is throwing us out because she's jealous of our happiness." The comments were brutal. Hundreds of people who didn't know the real story were attacking me. What kind of monster evicts family? Greed is so ugly. She'll die alone with her money. My nursing colleagues started texting confused and concerned. The hospital's HR department called someone had sent them Madison's posts claiming I was unfit to care for children if I could be so heartless to my own family. I called Mr. Hutchinson immediately. "I've seen them," he said before I could speak. "Screen record everything. This is defamation and we'll add it to our civil suit. Don't respond publicly. Let her dig her own legal grave." But Madison wasn't done. Throughout the day, she escalated her social media campaign. She posted what she claimed was security footage of me breaking in to change the locks, actually video of me entering my own house with my legal key. She shared screenshots of text messages supposedly from me, threatening them crude photoshops that wouldn't fool anyone who looked closely, but her followers weren't looking closely. The crescendo came that evening. Madison went live on Instagram, broadcasting from her room as she packed her life away. 3,000 viewers watched as she opened boxes, pulling out items with manufactured emotion. "This was my sweet 16 tiara," she said, holding up the rhinestone crown. "I wore it the night Dad, my stepfather, officially adopted me in his heart, if not legally. And now his biological daughter is making sure I can never feel that belonging again." The adoption lie was a new low. My father had never even discussed adopting Madison. She was 25 years old and had a living father who sent sporadic birthday cards and nothing else. But her audience ate it up. The viewer count climbed. Comments flooded, in many offering her places to stay money for a lawyer's sympathy for her plight. Someone started a GoFundMe, "Help Madison Save Her Childhood Home." It raised $2,000 in 3 hours before I could report it as fraudulent. I was documenting everything when I heard a car pull up outside the hotel. Through the window, I saw Madison's car, a BMW her mother had leased for her in the parking lot. She was here, at my hotel. I double-checked that my door was locked and called hotel security. "We have someone who may be planning to harass me," I explained. "She's my stepsister currently under eviction, and she's been posting defamatory content about me online." Security promised to monitor the situation. Within minutes, I heard commotion in the hallway. Madison's voice, loud and dramatic, carried through the door. "I just want to talk to my sister. I want to apologize. Why won't anyone help me reconcile with my family?" She was live streaming again. I could see it on my phone, the hotel hallway security approaching her tearful face, perfectly angled for maximum sympathy. "They won't even let me apologize," she sobbed to her audience. "I came here to make peace, to beg for forgiveness, and she's called security on me. Her own sister." Security firmly escorted her out, but the damage was done. The video went viral within hours. Evil stepsister started trending locally. Someone found my LinkedIn and posted it to Reddit. My professional headshot became a meme, the face of family betrayal. But Madison had made a crucial mistake. In her eagerness to destroy me, she'd been sloppy. The security footage she'd posted included clear timestamp data proving she'd changed the locks illegally. Her live streams showed undamaged property she'd claimed I'd destroyed. Most damning, she'd accidentally included a glimpse of the actual eviction notice in one video, contradicting her claims about the reasons for removal. Internet detectives started noticing inconsistencies. Why did she claim to have lived there since childhood, but earlier posts showed a different house? Why were there no photos of her in the home before age 18? How could someone who claimed to be homeless afford a BMW and designer clothes? The tide began to turn, but not before the damage spread. My supervisor called parents of patients had seen the posts and expressed concern. While the hospital supported me, they suggested I take a few days off until things calmed down. Madison, drunk on viral attention, escalated further. She posted a tour of her house, showing damage that didn't exist, claiming I'd already started destroying her home. But sharp-eyed viewers noticed something she'd missed. Visible in several shots were the security cameras I'd installed after her birthday party. I'd recorded everything. Working with Mr. Hutchinson, we prepared a comprehensive response. Not emotional appeals or social media drama, but facts. Security footage of Madison's party showing her destroying property. Time-stamped video of her entering my locked room. Audio from the cameras in common areas where recording was legal, capturing her calling me the help, and discussing how to milk Jamie for everything before Mom marries someone richer. We sent cease and desist letters to Madison and Patricia demanding they stop the defamatory posts. When Madison ignored them, continuing her campaign, we released the security footage. The internet's judgment was swift and merciless. The same commenters who'd called me a monster now turned on Madison with double the venom. Her Instagram followers plummeted. The GoFundMe was shut down with a fraud warning. Someone found her old posts bragging about living rent-free and never having to work like regular people. But Madison wasn't finished. Cornered and exposed, she lashed out with one final desperate video. Fine, you want the truth. She was clearly intoxicated, mascara, streaking hair disheveled. Yeah, we treated her like crap. So what? She let us. For 7 years, she cooked and cleaned and paid rent like a good little servant, because she's too pathetic to stand up for herself. And now she suddenly grows a spine because some old lady felt sorry for her. She's not a victim, she's a doormat who got lucky. The video was meant to hurt me, but it became her complete undoing. In trying to wound me, she'd confessed to everything: the exploitation, the cruelty, the deliberate nature of their treatment. Major news outlets picked up the story. Influencers' viral rant exposes years of family exploitation became a trending topic. Her employer, the real estate firm that had already been questioning her after the birthday party arrest, fired her immediately. The BMW was repossessed when Patricia stopped making payments. Madison's carefully curated online persona crumbled entirely. The next morning, I received a package at the hotel. Inside was an envelope of cash, $3,000, and a note in Madison's handwriting. This is all I have. Please don't release any more videos. I'm sorry, I'll leave quietly. I stared at the money, probably from the GoFundMe, before it was shut down. It wasn't even a fraction of what I'd spent supporting the household over 7 years, but it wasn't about the money. It never had been. I had Mr. Hutchinson return it with a simple message. Use this for your moving expenses. Leave by the deadline. Stop the harassment. No further contact. Madison's social media went dark after that. The videos were deleted, the accounts made private, or deactivated entirely. The internet moved on to its next drama, leaving only archived screenshots and think pieces about toxic family dynamics in the social media age. But the real cost was higher than followers or reputation. Madison had spent so long crafting an online persona that she'd forgotten how to exist without it. Her entire identity had been built on the fiction of being a successful influencer from a perfect family. Without that fiction, she had nothing. 3 days remained on the eviction notice. The house was quiet when I drove by. No more parties, no more drama, just the steady work of lives being packed into boxes. Madison's revenge had backfired spectacularly, accelerating their departure and cementing my decision. Sometimes the best response to someone trying to destroy you is simply to let them reveal who they really are. Madison had done that more thoroughly than I ever could have. The truth, as they say, had set us all free, just not in the way she'd intended. My lawyer, Mr. Hutchinson, arrived at the hotel the next morning with a manila envelope that felt heavier than its physical weight suggested. "I've been saving this for the right moment," he said, settling into the small chair by the window. "Your aunt was very specific about when you should receive this additional documentation. Inside the envelope were photographs, letters, and a thick document that looked like a private investigator's report. My hands trembled slightly as I began to read. The first page was a letter in Aunt Helen's distinctive handwriting. My dearest Jamie, if you're reading this, then you finally stood up to them. I'm so proud of you, dear one. I know it wasn't easy. I know you probably feel guilty, but you need to know the truth about why I did what I did. 3 years ago, I hired a private investigator, not to spy, but to check on you. You'd stopped calling as often, and when you did, you sounded so tired, so defeated. What he found broke my heart and ignited my anger in equal measure. I looked up at Mr. Hutchinson. She hired a private investigator. He nodded. She was concerned, but didn't want to interfere directly. She knew you'd refuse help out of pride or misplaced loyalty, so she gathered evidence instead. I returned to the letter. The investigator documented everything. The photos will show you what I saw you coming home from 12-hour shifts to cook elaborate meals you weren't invited to share, you cleaning while they lounged by the pool you weren't welcome to use, you paying rent for an attic room while Madison lived like a princess in what should have been your space. But the worst part was watching you shrink. Each year you became smaller, quieter, less like the vibrant young woman your mother raised. They weren't just taking your labor, Jamie. They were stealing your light. The photographs were damning, shot after shot of me carrying groceries while Patricia and Madison sat on the porch, me mowing the lawn in the summer heat while they sunbathed, me through the kitchen window at midnight still cleaning up from a dinner party I hadn't been invited to attend. One photo stopped me cold. It showed me sitting alone in my car in the hospital parking lot, clearly crying. The timestamp showed it was Christmas Eve 2 years ago, the night Patricia had told me not to join the family dinner because it would be awkward with Madison's boyfriend's family. These photos, I couldn't finish the sentence, were taken from public property or with permission from neighbors, Mr. Hutchinson assured me. Everything was legal and above board. Your aunt was very careful. The investigator's report was thorough and clinical. Subject Jamie Richardson exhibits signs of sustained emotional abuse and financial exploitation. Despite professional success, promoted to charge nurse, received multiple commendations, subject maintains subservient role in household. Family members demonstrate pattern of deliberate exclusion, excessive demands, and psychological manipulation. Of particular note, subject pays $700 a month for substandard accommodations, while comparable rooms rent for $300, $400 in same neighborhood. Subject provides approximately 30 to 40 hours weekly of unpaid domestic labor, valued at $600, $800 week. Total estimated financial exploitation, $75,000, $100,000 over observation period. Aunt Helen's letter continued. I wanted to storm in and rescue you immediately, but my lawyer, dear Mr. Hutchinson, who's been so patient with my schemes, advised patience. He said you needed to come to the realization yourself that any change had to come from you. So I made my plans. I bought the house through a trust, ensuring they could never find out. I documented everything, and I waited, hoping you'd find your strength before it was too late. The house was never really about property, dear one. It was about giving you the power to reclaim your life. Every month they paid rent they were paying into your freedom fund. Every lease violation they committed was another tool for your eventual liberation. There was more, so much more. Financial records showing how Aunt Helen had structured the purchase to maximum benefit for me. Legal strategies she'd developed with Mr. Hutchinson for various scenarios, even psychological resources for recovering from long-term emotional abuse. She loved you very much, Mr. Hutchinson said quietly as I wiped away tears. She called you her true granddaughter, even though you were technically her great-niece. Said you were the only one who inherited your mother's strength, even if it had been buried under others' cruelty. One document caught my eye, a transcript of a conversation between Aunt Helen and the investigator. "Aya, has there been any physical abuse? P.I. No, ma'am. It's all psychological and financial. A.H. In some ways, that's worse. Bruises heal. But when they convince you that you deserve mistreatment, that you're lucky to have what little they give you, That damage goes deep. PI, what do you want me to do? AH, keep watching, keep documenting, and pray she finds her backbone before they break her completely. The final page of Aunt Helen's letter was dated just a month before her death. I won't be here to see you reclaim your life, dear one. My doctor says weeks, maybe days, but I'll die knowing I've given you the tools you need. The house, the evidence, the legal framework, it's all there waiting for you. But more importantly, I want you to know this. You are not what they've made you believe. You are not the help. You are not a burden. You are not lucky to have that cold attic room. You are a talented, compassionate woman who saves children's lives. You are your mother's daughter, strong, capable, worthy of respect and love. You are someone who deserves to eat at the table, not in the kitchen. Someone who deserves to swim in the pool, not just clean it. Someone who deserves to live, not just exist. They will call you cruel when you finally stand up. They will say you're vindictive, ungrateful, heartless. They will try every manipulation they know. Do not listen. Do not waver. Do not let them steal one more day of your life. And when you finally sit in your dining room, in your house, living your life, toast a glass to your old Aunt Helen. I'll be watching with your mother and will be so very proud. All my love, Aunt Helen. P.S. Check the attic crawl space behind the old wardrobe. I left something for you there during my last visit. I looked at Mr. Hutchinson in shock. There's something in the house. He smiled. She insisted on visiting one last time about 6 months before she passed. Said she wanted to see the place once more. She was alone in the attic for about an hour, told Patricia she was praying in the space where her dear friend's daughter slept. I thought back to that visit. Patricia had been annoyed by Aunt Helen's request to see my room, but couldn't refuse a 90-year-old woman. I'd been at work, had missed seeing her that final time. What did she leave? I asked. I don't know, Mr. Hutchinson admitted. She never told me. Just smiled that mischievous smile of hers and said you'd understand when you found it. I stared at the pile of evidence, years of documentation, carefully gathered proof of my exploitation. Aunt Helen had seen what I'd been too close to see. She'd watched them dim my light and had spent her final years ensuring I'd have the chance to shine again. There's one more thing, Mr. Hutchinson said, pulling out a final envelope. She instructed me to give you this only after you'd read everything else. Inside was a single photograph my mother and Aunt Helen at my mother's wedding, both radiant with joy. On the back in my mother's handwriting, "Thank you for being my daughter's guardian angel. Love always, Sarah." Below that, in Aunt Helen's shaky script, "Promise kept, my dear Sarah. Your daughter has found her way home." I broke down completely, then sobbing for the great aunt who'd loved me enough to orchestrate my freedom from beyond the grave. For my mother who'd been gone so long, but whose strength still lived in me. For the 7 years I'd lost and the lifetime I'd gained. Mr. Hutchinson quietly gathered the documents, leaving me the photos and letters. "Take your time," he said gently. "The house will be yours in 2 days. Then you can find whatever Helen left for you." After he left, I sat among the evidence of years of love and planning. Aunt Helen had seen me not as I was diminished and exploited, but as I could be. She'd believed in my strength even when I'd forgotten it existed. 2 more days. Then I could search that crawl space and discover the final piece of Aunt Helen's elaborate plan to save me from a life of servitude. Whatever she'd hidden there, I knew it would be exactly what I needed to hear, exactly when I needed to hear it. Some angels don't have wings. Some have white hair, sharp minds, and the patience to wait years for justice. Aunt Helen had been my angel working quietly in the background, ensuring that when I finally found my courage, I'd have everything needed to reclaim my life. 2 more days. I could hardly wait. The final eviction day arrived with the kind of crisp winter morning that makes everything feel more intense, more real. December 1st, a new month, a new beginning, and the end of my family's 7-year occupation of my house. The 48-hour emergency eviction had expired at midnight. They were now officially trespassing. I arrived at 8 in the morning with the sheriff's department, a locksmith, and a professional moving crew I'd hired to remove any belongings they'd left behind. What I found defied belief. Patricia and Madison had barricaded themselves inside. They'd changed the locks again illegally and moved furniture against the doors. Through the windows, I could see them inside Patricia on her phone and Madison filming everything on her camera despite her previous social media disaster. They were served proper notice. The Sheriff Deputy Harrison confirmed after reviewing the paperwork. "This is criminal trespass now. We'll handle it." But before he could act, the front door opened. Patricia emerged dressed in a business suit as if heading to court with Madison, behind her wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. They were both holding signs. Patricia's read, "Unlawful eviction, elder abuse." Madison's proclaimed, "Housing is a human right." Behind them, they'd assembled what looked like a makeshift protest. 3 of Patricia's friends from her jewelry-making circle stood on the porch with their own signs. Someone had alerted local media a news van pulled up just as we arrived. "This is an illegal eviction," Patricia announced loudly, clearly playing to the cameras. "I am 55 years old, being thrown out of my home of 7 years by a vindictive landlord who happens to be my stepdaughter. This is elder abuse and discrimination." Deputy Harrison looked at me with raised eyebrows. "Ma'am, are you seriously claiming elder abuse?" "I have a heart condition," Patricia declared, clutching her chest dramatically. "The stress of this vengeful eviction could kill me. My doctor says I need stability." From my bag, I produced a file Mr. Hutchinson had prepared for exactly this scenario. "Here's the lease agreement she signed the legal eviction notice served 21 days ago. The emergency eviction granted due to criminal behavior and documentation of multiple lease violations, including an arrest on the property." The deputy reviewed everything while Patricia continued her performance for the growing crowd of neighbors and media. "We've lived here 7 years," she cried out. "We've made this a home, and now right before Christmas she's throwing us out because we couldn't afford a rent increase." "There was no rent increase," I told the deputy quietly. "They're being evicted for cause." Madison had started live streaming again, narrating to her phone, "Day of our illegal eviction. The cops are here to throw us out like trash. This is what happens when family turns on family." The reporter from the news van approached, microphone extended. "Can you comment on the situation?" I was about to decline when Mr. Hutchinson's car pulled up. He emerged carrying a box of documents, having anticipated this final stand. "I represent the property owner," he announced with authority that made everyone pay attention. "Ms. Morrison and Ms. Madison are trespassers who've exhausted all legal remedies. They've been properly evicted for multiple lease violations, including operating an illegal business, unauthorized renovations that created safety hazards, and criminal activity resulting in arrest." "What criminal activity?" the reporter asked, sensing a story. "Ms. Madison was arrested for hosting a party that resulted in property damage and multiple citations for underage drinking," Mr. Hutchinson said calmly. "She changed the locks illegally, barring the owner from her own property. Would you like to see the police reports?" The tide was already turning, but Patricia wasn't finished. She suddenly collapsed onto the porch, clutching her chest. "My heart," she gasped. "The stress, call an ambulance." Madison dropped her phone, rushing to her mother. "Mom, oh my God, she's having a heart attack. You're killing her." She pointed at me accusingly. "You're literally killing my mother." Deputy Harrison called for paramedics while I remained calm. I'd seen enough medical emergencies to recognize performance versus reality. Patricia's breathing was even her color good, her clutching theatrical, rather than distressed. The paramedics arrived within minutes, checking Patricia's vitals with professional efficiency. "Ma'am, your heart rate is slightly elevated but well within normal ranges," one reported. "Your blood pressure is actually excellent. Are you experiencing any actual chest pain?" "It comes and goes," Patricia said weakly, eyes darting to the cameras. "We should transport you for evaluation," the paramedic said following protocol, "just to be safe." "But my house—" "Ma'am, if you're having a cardiac event, we need to get you to the hospital immediately." Caught in her own performance, Patricia had no choice but to be loaded into the ambulance. Madison tried to use this as leverage. "You see," she announced to the cameras, "my mother is being taken to the hospital because of this cruel eviction. We're not leaving. We're staying right here until—" Miss Deputy Harrison interrupted. "You're trespassing. You have two choices: leave voluntarily now or be arrested." Madison's bravado crumbled. "But my mom is receiving medical attention, which she apparently needs due to a pre-existing condition, not today's events. Now what's it going to be?" The cameras captured it all. Madison's face cycling through defiance, fear, and finally defeat. Her previous arrest had taught her that handcuffs weren't worth the Instagram content. "Fine," she spat, "but I need time to pack. You had 21 days. I said, speaking publicly for the first time. Plus an additional 48 hours after the emergency eviction. You chose to spend that time on social media and fake protests instead of packing." I turned to the reporter who was avidly recording everything. For 7 years, I paid rent for an attic room in my own inherited house, while being treated as unpaid domestic help. I cooked, cleaned, and maintained this property while being excluded from family meals and told I should be grateful for the opportunity to serve. When I inherited this house and asked them to either treat me with respect or leave, they chose to leave. Everything else has been their attempt to avoid consequences for their choices. "That's a lie," Madison shrieked, but even she seemed to realize how hollow it sounded. The professional movers I'd hired began their work under the sheriff's supervision. They carefully packed belongings into boxes, labeled everything, and loaded it onto trucks bound for a storage facility. I'd paid for 1 month of storage, more than I was legally required to do, to give them time to collect their things. Madison followed the movers, filming and narrating dramatically. There goes my childhood dresser, my memories, my life. But the neighbors who'd gathered weren't buying it. Many had witnessed years of my treatment. Mrs. Chen stood at her fence, arms crossed, shaking her head at Madison's theatrics. "I remember when you moved in," Mrs. Chen called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "You were 18, not a child, and that dresser came from a garage sale 2 years ago. I was there when your mother bought it for $40. Other neighbors began sharing their own observations. Mr. Peterson from 2 houses down mentioned seeing me mowing the lawn at dawn before hospital shifts. The Kaufmans recalled birthday parties I wasn't invited to despite preparing all the food. Sarah from across the street talked about hearing Patricia screaming at me for buying the wrong brand of coffee. The narrative Patricia and Madison had tried to craft of cruel eviction and family betrayal crumbled under the weight of community testimony. The locksmith changed the locks for the final time, installing a high-security system Mr. Hutchinson had recommended. The house was legally and finally mine. Madison made one last attempt at drama, throwing herself across the doorway. "You can't do this. This is my home." "No," I said firmly. "It's mine. It's been mine for 3 months legally and for 28 years by right of birth and love. You're no longer welcome here." Deputy Harrison gently but firmly moved Madison aside. She stood on the lawn looking lost without her props and protest signs. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, and for the first time it sounded like a genuine question rather than manipulation. "That's not my responsibility," I replied. "But I'd suggest you start with getting a job and learning to support yourself. You're 25 years old, it's time." The news crew packed up, having gotten their story. The neighbors dispersed, many offering me quiet words of support. The movers finished loading the trucks and handed me an inventory. Madison called an Uber, dragging her immediately necessary belongings in designer luggage. Before getting in the car, she turned back one more time. "I'll never forgive you for this," she said. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," I replied. "I'm asking for you to leave, and now finally you have." The Uber pulled away, taking Madison to wherever Patricia's friends would house her. The sheriff's department left after confirming the property was secure. Mr. Hutchinson shook my hand and promised to handle any remaining legal issues. And then for the first time in 7 years, I stood alone in front of my house with keys that only I possessed. The sun broke through the clouds as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was empty, echoing with possibility. There was damage to repair, cleaning to be done, and a life to rebuild. But first, there was something I needed to find. I climbed the stairs to the attic, my prison for 7 years, and looked for the crawl space behind the old wardrobe. Whatever Aunt Helen had left for me was waiting, and finally, I was ready to receive it. The moving day meltdown was over. The protests had failed. The performances had ended. I was home. That evening, as golden sunset light filtered through the empty rooms of my finally peaceful house, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Through the living room window, I watched my father emerge from his sedan, moving slowly, looking every day of his 58 years, and then some. He stood at the front door for a long moment before knocking a soft, hesitant sound that carried through the empty house. I'd been cleaning the kitchen, trying to erase the last traces of Patricia's occupation, and my hands were covered in suds. I dried them deliberately, taking my time. He knocked again, slightly louder. When I opened the door, I was struck by how diminished he looked. His usually pressed shirt was wrinkled, his salt and pepper hair uncombed. Behind him, the garden my mother had planted was visible in the dying light, the garden Patricia had wanted to pave over, but hadn't gotten around to destroying. "Hello, Dad." "Jamie." His voice was hoarse. "May I come in?" I stepped aside, letting him enter the house where he'd lived for decades, but which had never truly been his home, not since Mom died anyway. He walked into the living room, now empty of furniture, and stood awkwardly in the space where his recliner had been. "Patricia's in the hospital," he said without preamble. "Observation. They say it's anxiety, not her heart." I assumed as much. He turned to face me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes, genuine confusion. "How did we get here, Jamie? How did it come to this?" "You tell me, Dad. You're the one who chose this path." He moved to the window, looking out at the street where neighbors were settling in for quiet evenings. Normal families doing normal things. "I've left Patricia," he said quietly. The words hung in the air between us. I waited, having learned over the years that silence often prompted more honesty than questions. "I went to the hospital," he continued. "She was screaming at the nurses, demanding special treatment, threatening to sue everyone. And Madison was there, filming it all for her social media, turning her mother's fake crisis into content. And I realized I've been living in a circus. I've been so desperate to not be alone that I surrounded myself with chaos and called it family." He turned back to me, and for the first time in years, he looked directly at me, not through me or around me, but at me. "I've been a terrible father." The admission should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt sad. "Yes," I agreed simply. "You have." He flinched, but didn't argue. Moving slowly like an old man, he lowered himself to sit on the floor where his chair used to be. After a moment, I joined him, sitting cross-legged like we used to when I was little, and he'd read me stories. "Your mother would have hated what I became," he said, pulling out a manila envelope from his jacket. "I found these while packing. I've been saving them." He handed me the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were photographs I'd never seen my mother in her garden, laughing at something off camera. My parents' wedding day, Mom holding infant me in the hospital. But there were also letters in her handwriting recipes. She'd collected cards she'd made for various holidays. "Patricia made me put them away," he admitted. "Said it wasn't healthy to keep shrines to the dead, but I couldn't throw them out. I kept them in my office, hidden in tax files where she'd never look." I touched a photo of my mother, feeling closer to her than I had in years. "Why show me these now?" "Because I finally understand what I lost. Not just your mother, I lost her daughter too. I was so focused on not being alone that I pushed away the one person who actually mattered. It took you 7 years to figure that out." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I'm a coward, Jamie. I've always been a coward. When your mother got sick, I threw myself into work because I couldn't handle watching her fade. After she died, I couldn't handle your grief on top of mine, so I withdrew. When Patricia came along, she was easy. She didn't remind me of loss. She didn't carry ghosts. She was shallow and materialistic and exactly what I thought I needed. And I was the price you paid for that comfort. Yes. The word came out broken. I told myself I was providing stability, keeping the peace. But I was just choosing the path of least resistance. Every time Patricia criticized you, every time Madison treated you badly, every time you ate alone in the kitchen, I knew it was wrong. But speaking up would have meant conflict, and conflict would have meant possibly losing my buffer against loneliness. We sat in silence as darkness filled the empty room. Somewhere upstairs, the old house creaked and settled, making the sounds that had been my only company for so many nights. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said finally. "I haven't earned it, but I need you to know that I see it now. All of it. The way you kept Mom's memory alive through her recipes while I let Patricia erase her from the walls. The way you maintained her garden while I stood by as Patricia planned to destroy it. The way you became the woman your mother would have been proud of while I became a man she wouldn't recognize. What do you want from me, Dad?" He struggled to his feet, looking around the empty room. "Nothing. I have no right to want anything from you. I needed to tell you the truth, and to give you these." He gestured to the photos. "They belong with someone who actually loved her." He moved toward the door, then stopped. From his pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. "One more thing. This was your mother's. I should have given it to you years ago, but Patricia said—" He shook his head. "It doesn't matter what Patricia said." I opened the box. Inside was my mother's engagement ring, a simple solitaire diamond in an antique setting. I'd asked about it after she died, but Dad had said it was in the safety deposit box. Another lie to keep the peace. "She wanted you to have it," he said quietly. "Told me before she died. Said when you found someone who loved you the way you deserved to be loved, you should wear it, or reset it, or sell it, whatever brought you joy. She just wanted you to have the choice." Tears blurred my vision. All these years while I'd been serving meals in my mother's kitchen, her ring had been hidden away because Patricia didn't want reminders of the first wife. "Patricia never knew I kept it," he added. "One small rebellion in 7 years of capitulation." I slipped the ring onto my right hand. It fit perfectly. My father moved to the door again, pausing at the threshold. "I'm staying at the extended stay on Riverside, trying to figure out what comes next. I know I have no right to ask, but could you let me know you're okay sometimes? A text, an email, anything. Not for me. I know I don't deserve that. But your mother. I promised her I'd take care of you, and I failed so completely. At least let me know you're thriving despite my failures." I looked at this broken man who'd chosen comfort over courage for 7 years. Part of me wanted to rage at him to list every moment he'd failed me. But what would be the point? He already knew. It was written in every line on his face, every slump of his shoulders. "I'll think about it," I said finally. He nodded, accepting that was more than he deserved. "I love you, Jamie. I know I haven't shown it. I know words are cheap after years of silence. But I do love you, and I'm proud of who you've become. Your mother raised you right in those 12 years she had. I just wish I'd had the strength to continue her work." He left then, walking to his car like a man carrying stones. I watched from the doorway as he drove away, tail lights disappearing into the darkness. I closed the door and locked it, then stood in my empty house holding my mother's photos and wearing her ring. The silence felt different now, not lonely, but peaceful. Not abandoned, but free. My father had finally stood up, not for me that ship had sailed, but to me. He'd acknowledged his failures, returned what he'd hidden and left without asking for absolution I couldn't give. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough to erase 7 years of betrayal. But it was something, a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. I climbed the stairs to the attic one more time, ready now to find whatever Aunt Helen had left. My mother's ring caught the hallway light, sparkling like a promise. My father had made his last stand, such as it was. Now it was time for my life to truly begin. Within a month, the transformation was complete. What had once been a house filled with tension and servitude had become a home that breathed with new life and possibility. The illegal garage conversion Patricia had created for her jewelry business became my art studio. I'd forgotten how much I loved to paint. 7 years of exhaustion had buried that joy, along with so many others. Now canvases lined the walls, and northern light flooded through the new windows I'd had installed properly with permits and everything. Madison's former party room in the basement was now a library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held not just my nursing textbooks, but all the novels I'd been too tired to read, all the poetry I'd been too numb to feel. A comfortable reading chair sat by the window, and I'd actually used it. Imagine that, sitting still in my own house without guilt. The real transformation, though, was in the business I'd started. 2 bedrooms now served as Airbnb rentals, decorated with a mix of modern comfort and vintage charm that honored the house's history. The basement apartment, once Madison's overflow closet, had been converted into a beautiful rental unit. A young couple, both teachers, had moved in and filled the space with warmth and gratitude that made me realize how starved I'd been for basic human kindness. "You're sure about the rent?" Melissa had asked when they'd first viewed the apartment. "It's below market rate for this neighborhood." I'm sure I'd told them. I'd rather have good tenants who appreciate the space than maximize profit. They'd brought me cookies the first week and invited me to dinner the second. After 7 years of cooking for people who couldn't be bothered to include me sitting at their table, while Tom told funny stories about his 5th graders, felt like a miracle. The Airbnb had taken off faster than I'd expected. The Victorian's character, combined with its location and my mother's garden now restored to its former glory, made it popular with visitors. I'd even hired Mrs. Chen's niece, a college student, to help with the cleaning and check-ins. "You're a natural at this," she'd told me after I'd explained my system for the 3rd time, worried I was being too particular. So organized, but also so welcoming. The local news station had called, wanting to do a follow-up story. From family drama to business success, local nurse transforms inherited home into thriving rentals. I'd agreed, but only because it gave me a chance to set the record straight. The reporter, the same one who'd covered the eviction drama, sat across from me in my beautiful living room, now furnished with pieces that I'd chosen that reflected my taste, my comfort. "This is quite a change from a month ago," she noted. "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you're not spending 40 hours a week cooking and cleaning for people who treat you like hired help," I said with a smile. "The video of that eviction day went viral. How did you handle the public attention?" "By focusing on the truth. For 7 years, I paid rent to live in an attic room of a house I'd inherited while being treated as unpaid domestic labor. When I finally stood up for myself, they tried to paint me as the villain. But truth has a way of surfacing." What would you say to critics who felt you should have been more forgiving? It was family, after all. I'd thought carefully about my answer. Family isn't about blood or marriage certificates. It's about how you treat people when you think no one's watching. For 7 years, my stepfamily showed me exactly who they were. Believing them was the healthiest thing I ever did. The segment aired the week before Christmas. The response was overwhelming messages of support from other people who'd been trapped in toxic family situations, seeing my story as inspiration for their own liberation. But the sweetest victory came in smaller moments: cooking dinner in my kitchen and eating it at my dining room table, swimming in my pool on a hot day without asking permission, sitting in my living room reading a book without someone demanding I fetch them something. The financial success was gratifying. Between the rentals and my nursing salary, I was more secure than I'd ever been. But the emotional success was priceless. I'd reclaimed not just my house, but my life. One evening, as I was painting in my studio, I heard a knock on the door. Through the peephole, I saw Madison's former co-worker from the real estate firm. "Hi, Jamie, I'm Sienna. I worked with Madison. I was wondering if you had a moment." Curious, I let her in. She looked around the renovated space with obvious admiration. "This is beautiful. So different from before." "Thank you. How can I help you?" "Actually, I was hoping I could help you. I saw the news segment about your rental business. I specialize in property management for small landlords. I wondered if you might need assistance as you grow." We talked for an hour. Sienna was professional, knowledgeable, and had a story of her own about Madison's behavior at work that made me realize I hadn't been the only target of her cruelty. "She was a nightmare," Sienna confided. "Took credit for everyone else's work, never did her own, treated the assistants terribly. When she was fired after that arrest, we actually celebrated." I hired her part-time to help manage the rentals, freeing up more time for my nursing career and my rediscovered love of painting. The best moment came when I received a package from a gallery downtown. Inside was a letter. "Ms. Richardson, we recently viewed your artwork on your Instagram page and would be interested in discussing representation. Your piece, Liberation Day, particularly caught our attention. Please contact us at your earliest convenience." Liberation Day was a painting of my mother's garden in full bloom, painted from the view from what used to be my attic prison. I'd started it the day after the eviction and finished it just that week. It was the first painting I'd completed in 7 years. I called them immediately. As Christmas approached, I decorated the house for the first time in years, with decorations I chose in a style that felt like me. The tenants helped turning it into a party. Mrs. Chen brought cookies. My colleagues from the hospital stopped by with wine. Even Mr. Hutchinson came bringing his wife and a bottle of champagne. To sweet victory, he toasted, raising his glass in my dining room, where I'd once stood, frozen, holding a tray of appetizers I wouldn't be invited to share. To Aunt Helen, I countered, "Who saw what others refused to see and gave me the tools to save myself." Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my living room, and opened my laptop to check the Airbnb bookings. January was already nearly full. The young teachers had asked about extending their lease. Sienna had sent 3 potential clients interested in having me manage their rental properties. My phone buzzed with a text. For a moment, my heart lurched, thinking it might be Patricia or Madison. But it was my father. "Saw the news segment. You look happy. Your mother would be so proud. I'm proud too, for whatever that's worth. Merry Christmas, Jamie." I stared at the text for a long moment, then typed back, "Merry Christmas, Dad." It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement that life moves forward, that victories can be sweet without being vengeful, that success is the best response to those who said you'd never achieve it. I poured myself a glass of wine, good wine, not the cheap stuff Patricia bought, and raised it to the empty room that wasn't empty at all. It was full of possibility, of peace, of the promise that the best was yet to come. The girl who'd been treated like the help was now helping others find homes. The woman who'd been banished to the attic now owned the entire house. The nurse who'd saved so many had finally saved herself. Sweet victory indeed. 6 months later, on a snowy Christmas Eve, my house on Magnolia Street glowed with warmth and light. Not the harsh showing-off illumination that Patricia had favored, but a gentle welcome that would have made my mother smile. I stood in my kitchen, truly my kitchen now, pulling the last batch of sugar cookies from the oven. The same recipe my mother had used, the one I'd made for 7 years, while being told I was naturally domestic. But tonight was different. Tonight I was cooking for people who saw me as family, not staff. Not. Those smell amazing. Melissa appeared in the doorway carrying a stack of plates. She and Tom had become more than tenants over the months they'd become friends. Real friends who helped without being asked and included without obligation. "My mom's recipe," I said, transferring cookies to the cooling rack. "She used to say the secret was love." My father finished from behind Melissa. "She always said the secret ingredient was love." The room paused. Melissa, sensing the weight of the moment, quietly excused herself to the dining room where the others were gathered. My father stood in the doorway of the kitchen he'd lived in for decades, holding a poinsettia plant. He looked healthier than he had 6 months ago, cleaner somehow, as if the weight of his choices had been acknowledged and set down. "You came," I said simply. "You invited me." He set the plant on the counter, then pulled out an envelope. "I wanted to give you this. It's not a Christmas gift. It's restitution." Inside was a check for $42,000. "It's every penny of rent you paid plus interest," he explained quietly. "I know money doesn't fix anything, but you never should have paid to live in your own home. This is the least I can do." I looked at the check, then at him. 6 months of therapy had changed us both, me learning to set boundaries, him learning to respect them. "Thank you," I said, putting the check aside. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" His eyes filled with tears. I'd be honored. The dining room was full of the family I'd chosen. Mrs. Chen and her husband occupied the seats where Patricia used to hold court. 2 of my nursing colleagues, Jenny and Amara, sat where Madison had filmed her viral videos. Tom was in my father's old chair telling one of his teaching stories. Mr. Hutchinson and his wife had claimed the corner near the restored china cabinet. "Everyone," I announced, "this is my father, Richard." The introduction was met with polite but cautious greetings. They all knew the story, but they also knew about redemption, about the possibility of change, about the difference between forgiveness and forgetting. My father took the empty seat not at the head of the table where he'd once presided, but as one guest among many. He listened more than he talked, laughed at Tom's stories, complimented Mrs. Chen's dumplings. For the first time in years, he was present without trying to avoid the ghosts in the room. After dinner, as we gathered in the living room for coffee and dessert, Amara asked about the painting above the fireplace, a new piece I'd just hung. "It's called Inheritance," I explained. "My first sale to a collector, actually." The painting showed 3 women in a garden, my mother young and vibrant, Aunt Helen elderly but fierce, and me, somewhere between them, hands dirty from planting face, turned toward the sun. "It's beautiful," my father said softly. "Helen would have loved it." "She did love it," I said, which made everyone look at me in confusion. "That's actually what I wanted to share with all of you tonight." I retrieved a box from the mantel, the same box I'd discovered in the attic crawlspace 6 months ago, exactly where Aunt Helen had promised it would be. When my great-aunt Helen passed, she left me this house and a mystery, something hidden in the attic. When I finally found it, it was this box with a letter and something else. I pulled out the letter, yellowed with age. This was written by my mother when she was first diagnosed. She gave it to Aunt Helen for safekeeping with instructions to give it to me when I was ready. Aunt Helen decided that meant when I was strong enough to stand up for myself. With steady hands, I read, "My dearest Jamie, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've finally found your strength. I know it's there, I can see it in you, even at 12, that core of steel beneath your gentle heart. I don't know what your life will look like when you read this. I don't know who will love you, who will hurt you, who will try to dim your light. But I know who you are, and more importantly, I know who you'll become. You'll become someone who heals others because you understand pain. You'll become someone who creates beauty because you've seen ugliness. You'll become someone who stands up for herself because you've learned that no one else can do it for you. The house is just a building, my darling. What makes it home is the love within its walls. Fill it with people who see your worth. Cook for those who appreciate the gift of your time. Open your door to those who enter with respect. And remember, you are not what others make you. You are not the roles they assign. You are not the services you provide. You are my daughter Helen's grandniece and your own woman. Be brave, my darling. Be kind, but most of all, be free. All my love, Mom. P.S. Check the bottom of the box. Some treasures are worth waiting for. I reached into the box and pulled out the last item, another small velvet box. Inside were my grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones my mother had worn on her wedding day, the ones Patricia had claimed were lost in the move. Helen saved them, I said, putting them on. They matched my mother's ring perfectly, just like she saved me. The room was quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire and a few sniffles. Mrs. Chen was openly crying. Tom had his arm around Melissa. Even my father wiped his eyes. To inherited treasures, Mr. Hutchinson raised his coffee cup, both material and spiritual. To chosen families, Mrs. Chen added. To second chances, my father said quietly. To coming full circle, I finished. We toasted with coffee and cookies, the room full of warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Later, as people began to leave, each taking containers of cookies and leftovers, because cooking for others was a joy when it was a choice, not an expectation. My father lingered. I know I can't undo the past, he said, but I want you to know I see you now. Not as your mother's ghost, not as someone to manage my household, but as you, Jamie, my daughter who saves lives and paints beauty and turned pain into purpose. It's a start, I said. Healing isn't instant, but it's a start. He nodded, understanding. As he left, he turned back one more time. The house looks beautiful, like it did when she was alive, but somehow also entirely yours. After everyone had gone, I stood in my living room wearing my grandmother's pearls and my mother's ring, surrounded by the echoes of genuine laughter and real love. The girl who'd once served dinner she wasn't invited to share had just hosted Christmas Eve for the family she'd chosen and who had chosen her in return. Through the window, snow continued to fall on Magnolia Street, blanketing the world in fresh possibility. Somewhere, Patricia was probably still complaining about the injustice of consequences. Madison was likely crafting another social media persona, another fiction to replace the one that had crumbled. But here in this house that had seen so much pain and finally witnessed joy, I was exactly where I belonged. Not in the attic, not in the kitchen, not on the margins of other people's lives, but at the center of my own story, surrounded by people who saw my worth not in what I could do for them, but in who I was. The circle was complete. The girl who'd lost her mother had found her strength. The woman who'd been called the help had helped herself. And the house that had been a prison had become a sanctuary not just for me, but for everyone who entered with love and left with cookies. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed in the master bedroom now, because why shouldn't I have the best room in my own house, I whispered a thank you to the two women who'd made this possible. My mother, who'd planted the seeds of strength, and Aunt Helen, who'd made sure they had room to grow. Tomorrow was Christmas. There would be more gatherings, more laughter, more life lived fully and freely. But tonight, in the quiet of my reclaimed home, I was simply grateful. The inheritance had never really been about the house. It had been about the chance to choose my own life. And what a beautiful life it had become. Dear readers, if you've stayed with Jamie's journey this far, thank you. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who took advantage of your kindness? Sometimes the hardest battles are with those who should love us most. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your life. Like and subscribe if you believe everyone deserves to eat at the table, not serve it. And comment below with your own stories of finding strength in difficult family situations. Your experiences might help someone else find their courage. From my home to yours, may you always know your worth and never settle for less than you deserve.